Ben, watch your mouth. We're live. Oh, he's cursing this morning. All right, Brianna, she's joining us here. We're back on YouTube, everybody. Oh, you're not on video yet, Ben. Hold on. Let me... hey, come on. See what I'm saying, guys? He is going to let a curse word fly. I have a please, you're making me nervous. All right, let me get the video going here. There you go, Ben. Wave. Hi there. There you go.
Did you see the Facebook post I did with Dr. D's help?
Who are you talking to?
You.
Me?
Yeah. Or whoever's out there. See that Facebook post? Dr. D helped me on it. Okay?
All right.
We're back. Get tons of hits, by the way.
We're back on YouTube. I see Brianna posted. But, Brianna, we're not sure if you can hear us. So let's do what we always do with our sound check. Ben, let's hear that song of the day.
Conquistador, stallion stand. For 10 trivia points, who sings that song?
I don't know.
Procol Harum. Come on.
Hey, did you guys hear that? Brianna, did you hear that?
Procol Harum. Conquistador, stallion stand. I don't know why I'm thinking of that song. That's why. Duh. Duh. How about those Bulls, huh, D?
Okay, please stop talking about sports. We're going to go ahead and get started, assuming that you can all hear us loud and clear. Please weigh in if you cannot. Your Ben Joravsky Show for Tuesday, December 10th is just moments away. But before we do this, we need to thank the following unions for sponsoring this program. First, it's the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace, Not Aerosmith Workers, Local 126 and District 8. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9, sponsors this program. The International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. And, of course, today's show is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor. Brianna has weighed in. Yes, unfortunately, we can hear.
Oh, man, I know I can't sing. Oh, man, I really wish I could. Don't know much about history. Hey, don't know much biology. You like that song, D?
Yeah,
no?
yeah. Not
okay.
bad, not bad.
You actually heard that song before?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Which version, Sam Cooke or Herman and the Hermits?
Hang tight, millennials. All right. Oh, yeah, okay. Stephen, I will return your email. I'm so sorry, Stephen. Got a little busy this weekend. All right, your Ben Joravsky Show. Ben, let's hear that song of the day, whichever one it is. You picked like 4.
Don't know much about history. Hey, don't know much biology. Come on, everybody. Brianna, you too. Don't know much about science books. And something about French. French is in that song.
The Ben Joravsky Show starts now. It is Tuesday, December 10th, and live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is the Ben Joravsky Show. Today on the program, Mr. Bike Dave Glowacz is back. He's actually right here to talk all things local politics, and I promise you, he did ride his bike. And it's an end-of-the-year recap with Democratic political strategists Laurie Glenn and Juanita Irizarry. And now your host, Chicago Reader columnist, Ben Joravsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Joravsky here. We're calling this Mr. Pike Shows Up Early Tuesday, and here's why. Actually, that's not what I was calling it, but Mr. Pike walked in. I'm so excited. I love it when my guests show up, D, and I love it even more when they show up early. Anyway, That's not what I was going to talk about right now. I'm going to talk about, well, let's first start with the obvious thing. It's Tuesday, so I'm going to say what I always say. I had a great week. Did you have a good weekend, Dr. D?
Yeah, had a great weekend. 3 days ago.
You want Mr. Bike to look at you?
Yeah, Mr. Bike, I need you to sit at this chair here.
Yeah, sit at that chair, right, Mr. Bike?
Something going on with your mic on that one.
Yeah, there's something going wrong with your mic, and I don't know what it is. Anyway, I had a great weekend. I just want to say I saw Ford versus Ferrari, which it's kind of inappropriate to talk about since it's a movie about cars, and Mr. Bike is in the studio, and he doesn't have a car. He doesn't drive a car. He won't even look at a car. He only rides a bicycle. Ring, ring, ring. But I saw Ford versus Ferrari. You see Ford versus Ferrari yet, D?
No. Who won? That. Ferrari?
Well, if I tell, it'll be like giving it away.
Okay, no spoilers.
It was a historical event, so it's sort of like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like the thing actually happened in the movie. There was a showdown between Ford and Ferrari back in Le Mans in the 60s. I love it when they race around the Christian Bale. I love Christian Bale. Great movie. Had a really enjoyed watching it, but then woke up. Had to get down to business, D. Lots of news in the world that I had to deal with and confront. The Justice Department, they cleared the FBI in its investigation, in the investigation of the FBI's investigation of Donald Trump. I'll tell you what, Republicans, I got to tip my hat to the Republicans. They are so slick. When their people do something wrong, they get the feds to investigate the feds who are investigating their people who do something wrong.
I'm lost.
It's like they can never do anything wrong. It's only, the lawmen, they're bad. They're bad people. They did something wrong. Donald Trump, you know what? Hats off to Donald Trump. And he's got the Chicago Tribune Board of Editorial people. They go along with it. Johnny Cass, columnist for the Chicago Tribune, he goes along. Well, the feds must have done something wrong if they investigated Donald Trump. But so it's nice to see that the Justice Department cleared the FBI for wrongdoing in the investigation of Donald Trump, which won't, of course, stop any of these Republicans from saying that Donald Trump is an innocent victim of overreach by the government. Where were they in 1969 when the feds shot Fred Hampton in his sleep, hiding under the bed? By the way, I just want to say that was an excellent interview we did with Flint Taylor, and we dropped it on Sunday, D, right? I urge everybody, not now, but later, check that out. That's fascinating historical perspective. Flint Taylor talking about the FBI teaming up with the state's attorney and Chicago police in 1969, killing Fred Hampton while he was sleeping. Anyway, I'm waiting for the federal investigation into that. It's not going to happen anytime soon. The other news, the Democrats are about ready. They may be doing this as I speak. Passing their articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. So we'll be talking a lot about that tomorrow with Monroe. And still feeling a fallout of Hillary Clinton's interview on the Howard Stern show. I wrote a column about it. Really upset about that. I really feel huge levels of ingratitude on the part of Hillary Clinton toward Mr. Bernie Sanders and all the efforts he made to try to get her elected back in 2016 over Donald Trump. And it exposes just this division between what, for lack of a better term, the Hillary and Bernie factions of my beloved Democratic Party. And I really do believe that the Hillary side of the Democratic Party has got to get over it already. All right? Still blaming Bernie for the 2016 election. As opposed to looking at all the other real reasons why Hillary did not win.
You're reeling in the listeners today. Hats off to Donald Trump and bashing the Hillary supporters. All right, here we go.
And so what else? I want to tell you about this conversation. I had a good dear friend with mine named Danny. That's not his real name, but I'm going to conceal his real name because we'll wait till you hear what the conversation was about. Danny's a very smart, very creative guy. He's an artist. But I mentioned in passing while we were chatting about this, that, and the other thing, Mayor Pete. And he said, who? And I said, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Dennis's favorite presidential candidate. The mayor, he just won't doing that to see if he's paying attention. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana, 37-year-old, doing very well in the polls. Is one of the top 3 candidates in Iowa. I think he's one of the top 3 candidates in New Hampshire.
And one of the top 3 candidates in your heart. Right, Ben?
Not really. Anyway, and he said, what? Who? Huh? Point is, he'd never heard of Mayor Pete before. And I suddenly realized once more time that the world is divided into people who obsessively follow politics, the kind of people who listen to my show, and just the great mass of humanity that's not really paying attention. And D, I was trying to tell this to you before we got started. I really shouldn't stand
I wasn't paying attention. Repeat that, please.
Judgment of Danny or anybody else who does not know who Mayor Pete is, because as you remember, I did not know who Billie Eilish was. Okay, remember that? When I was riding my bike to work and I saw Billie Eilish's it was a picture on a sign outside the United Center, meaning she was going to have a concert at the United Center. And I came into the studio and go, D, have you ever heard of Billie Eilish? Did you know who she was?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think you knew who she was. So I looked her up on the internet. I discovered she's one of the biggest, most successful pop singers in America today. She has like 200 million downloads of a video that she released. So I was really ignorant for not knowing who she was. And the only reason I knew who she was is I happened to be riding my bike by the United Center. I saw her picture out, and it occurred to me that there's a tremendous gap between me and the rest of humanity.
It took you long enough.
Like, if you're already playing at the United Center and I haven't heard you are, I'm really behind the times, D. The same thing happened to me at one time at a Wrigley Field concert. I was walking past Wrigley Field, and all these people with cowboy hats were going into Wrigley Field. So Wrigley Field, if you play at Wrigley Field, that means you're a pretty big superstar. And so I'm like, who's playing here? It was a country western singer, Jason something or other.
Aldean.
Yeah, I never heard of the guy.
Not surprised.
I'm like, oh man, I'm so bad. I never heard of Jason Aldean. But you've heard of Jason Aldean, but you hadn't heard of Billie Eilish.
No.
So anyway,
now I know who she is, but back then I didn't know Billie Eilish.
For 10 trivia points, which one of our guests was really
Leah? It was our intern.
Yeah, she knew who Billie Eilish. Ben, you don't know who Billie Eilish is. In fact, for a long time, I thought it was Billie Eilish.
Leah, we miss you, by the way.
Yeah, we really do miss Leah. Leah, I hope you're back, but she could be coming back for.
Don't tease me.
Okay. Anyway, Billie Eilish. I guess it was Leah who knew who it was, but there was a guest who would give me a hard time. Anyway, I should not be upset that there are people out there who are not paying attention to the Democratic primary to replace Donald Trump. As important as that primary may be to me, as important as it may seem to me and Mr. Bike and you, Dr. D, to see Donald John Trump defeated in this next election, I have to come to terms with the fact that there are people who are not paying attention in any way, and to the point where they do not know who Mayor Pete is, all right? So I shouldn't get on my high horse and talk about it. I shouldn't talk about the ignorance of the American voter. I shouldn't talk about the ignorance of the Chicago voter, which is something I'll probably be talking about in a little while, because the Sun-Times had one of my favorite articles with Fox Nab's top spot. We'll get into that in a little while. The lottery determining who gets where on a ballot, which is really a confession that the voters are utterly ignorant about the whole electoral process. So you know what, D? Instead of saying all those things, I'll say, you know what? If I don't know who Billie Eilish is, it's sort of acceptable that a very smart, very creative friend of mine named Danny did not know who Mayor Pete was. And so it's onward and upwards, all right, D? I learned who Billie Eilish is. I am determined, as we head into the next year, to educate the public about all the Democratic candidates in the process to defeat Donald Trump. In the meantime, we got a great show today. Yes, Mr. Bike is in the studio. Yes, he rode his bicycle.
Mr. Bike. Mr. Bike. Come on.
Yeah.
Mr. Bike.
Yes, he figured out how to get on the elevator and up here. He had a really great day, and I cannot wait. He's got all sorts of clips. No bike talk. We're not allowed to talk bikes. He's not going to ring his bell. What does that sound? I think that's the bell.
I think that's the geek meter from last week.
I think the geek meter. The geek meter will be set off a lot by Mr. Bike. By the way, Mr. Bike, I just want to tell you, I tried to I promote the segment on Facebook. I said, you know what? I'm going to discover my inner millennial. I'm going to promote the segment on Facebook. So I did a link to Laurie Glenn. Laurie Glenn will be a guest later on in the show. Juanita Irizarry, she'll be a guest later on the show. So I did links to them on Facebook, but I couldn't do a link to you because guess what? You're not on Facebook. So
That's correct.
That's
Facebook.com/InsideGov. That's Inside GOV.
wait, time out. You're not in there as Mr. Bike or Dave Glowacz?
Inside Chicago
Ah,
Government.
he's promoting. Look at that. He's on a different thing. D, you should have known that. Anyway, let's go back and
Facebook.com/bikertricks for urban bikers.
Wait, time out.
tricks and
So
tips.
you look at it, won't see a picture of you?
Correct.
Okay, well, you're all right. Well, all right. I will know that in the future. Bikers tricks. Uh-oh.
What the hell is that?
That's the geek meter.
It's too cold to stand outside and take the bell off of my handlebar, so I recorded it.
Oh, okay. I love when but I love when he rings the bell. Ding, ding,
It
ding.
loses something in the digitization, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Dave has a whole bunch of tape, a whole bunch of recordings from last week's city council meeting where they passed the budget. We're going to take the deep dive in the budget. So all the people out there who are ignorant and don't know what's going on, you're going to learn stuff today, all right? Maybe you'll even learn who Mayor Pete is. Anyway, so great show today, plenty of political discussion. But before we do any of that, the young man from Alton, the pride and joy of the 618, the man they call the doctor with the news.
Hey, everybody, how's it going? Having a good Tuesday? I'm Dennis. Let's find out what's happening in Chicago and or Illinois this afternoon. By the way, not knowing Billie Eilish is way different than not knowing Mayor Pete. Billie Eilish, not running for president.
That's true. But she has 108. She has a song that has I can't remember the name of the song, but it's a song she performed on Jimmy Fallon's show. I learned that. Okay.
You are so hip.
I know, man. With Alicia Keys. She sang it with Alicia Keys. So these are the things that are out there that people are talking about in America. They're hanging around a water cooler talking about these things. They're talking about Billie Eilish. They're talking about Alicia Keys. They're talking about Jimmy Fallon. And they're not talking about Mayor Pete. And I'm like, you should be talking about Mayor Pete. You should talk about the future of the world. And then when Mayor Pete's on Jimmy Fallon show, or anybody's on the Jimmy Fallon show, they like joke around. You know what I'm saying? Oh, let's not talk about it.
And we're pretty close to as many followers as Billie Eilish on YouTube, right?
She's at 184 million on that latest.
We're getting there.
We're like, yeah. We each have the number one in our group. Okay, we got a ways to go before we catch up to Billie Eilish.
All right, let's find out what's happening in Chicago and or Illinois this afternoon. A lot of Mayor Lightfoot news to discuss. So before we get all caught up in all of that, let's begin with our Democratic Illinois governor. Today, Governor J.B. Pritzker is at the Leuna Training Center. That stands for Laborers International Union of North America, and that's capital L, lowercase I for some reason, and then capital UNA. He was there to do, well, what he always does, sign legislation.
Okay.
Typical Pritzker.
Well, that's what you want him to do. I mean, he's better than the last governor we had. Remember, he would veto legislation and say, harumph.
This legislation calls attention to workforce diversity when it comes to the Rebuild Illinois capital projects. Later on, he'll join in the 40th anniversary celebration of the Illinois Human Rights Act being held at Carpenter's Hall. In statewide news, the state of Illinois has begun taking applications today for those looking to get in the legal recreational marijuana game. Regulators are taking applications for new recreational marijuana retail store owners. Applications to open up to 75 new adult use cannabis dispensaries beyond the ones already approved by the state will be taken from 9:30 a.m. this morning to 4 p.m. this afternoon on business days today through January 2nd at the office of the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation in the Thompson Center in downtown Chicago. So that's why all those people are at Thompson Center today, Ben. I know you're complaining.
I did not realize there were a whole bunch of people at the Thompson Center. I've been thinking about this, D. You talk about recreational marijuana, the legalization of marijuana. I'm going to write a column coming up because I'm coming to the realization. I know this sounds really weird coming from me. I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I'm at the point. I'm at the point where I don't want it legalized anymore. All right, I want marijuana to go back to being illegal.
Because your dealer's going to raise prices.
That's Mr. Bike weighing in. Dave Glowacz. And no, I mean, it's a long, complicated story. Probably related to I need psychiatric help, like something I really want in the world. When I finally get it, then I don't want it anymore. I need it. That's a cry for help, Mr. Bike. But the other thing is just the whole way we're going about it. My main criticism of the war on drugs and particularly the fact that marijuana was illegal, is that black people got arrested for something that white people did. So now we've legalized, and guess what? Everybody making money off it is a rich white guy. And it's just like we're just plowing ahead with this process, just making rich people, the same people who just pretended as though these inequities didn't exist when they were locking up black people for the things that white people did, the same people who were smoking reefer and then going, oh my God, pretending they weren't, the same people who were the utter freaking hypocrites that irritated me so much when marijuana was illegal are now going to be benefiting from it, from the legality of it. And that just irritates me to no end.
You and the Black Caucus in the city council.
Yes. Words I never thought would come out, but yes, I see eye to eye with the Black Caucus of the city council. Black Caucus usually is very favorable in their attitude toward Mayor Rahm and Mayor Daley. But in this particular point, I'm with Jason Irvin 100%. Alderman Jason Irvin, the pride and joy of the 28th Ward. I'm with him 100%. So it's like the utter hypocrisy of the war on drugs has been replaced by the utter hypocrisy of the legalization of marijuana. And I say, let's just go back to making it illegal. But with this little caveat, all right? Love it when I speak Latin. This little caveat. This little caveat. No one should be arrested for it. How about that? It's illegal, but no one should be arrested for it. And Dr. D's dealer and Mayor Bike's dealer can...
Mayor Bike!
Thanks for the promotion. I'm sure I want the job. It's like Eddie Johnson, right? He didn't want the job, but he got it anyway.
Oh my God, we haven't
I'm
even
sorry,
discussed Eddie
Sorry, I
Johnson.
brought up Eddie Johnson.
Oh my God, I am utterly obsessed with Eddie Johnson.
And what do you name the scandal of Eddie Johnson? What's it called?
Johnson Gate or Eddie Gate. Eddie Gate. It's
So,
Eddie Gate.
all right, say there was a scandal in the Chicago Water Department. What would you call that?
Watergate. So
Confusing.
Catch these two at Zanies this weekend. You guys are great.
anyway, so D, I'm just saying it. You know what? It's so hypocritical. The hypocrisy. I guess it was the hypocrisy of the war on drugs was the second worst thing about the war on drugs. The first worst thing was all the people who were arrested and just so thrown into jail, whose lives were ruined. But the utter hypocrisy of it was just too disgusting to take, and now we've just replaced one hypocrisy with another. So that's all I got to say on the subject, D. Right. Let's make marijuana illegal again.
But
no one can be arrested.
you've really got to put that second part in
No,
there.
the second part. No arrests, okay? We should pass a law. Nobody can be arrested for possessing reefer or smoking reefer. How about that?
All right, on to the Chicago news. No public events scheduled today for Chicago Mayor Laurie Lightfoot, Benny J., Mr. Bike, Dave Glowacz. It's a cold December afternoon in the city of Chicago. What do you guys think Laurie Lightfoot is doing right now?
Having lunch.
Oh, okay.
Luncheon.
A luncheon. What do you say, Mr. Bike?
She's going over a recording of her interview with Mayor Pete.
Oh, very good.
Did you go to Segway school? Because that was a perfect segue. Because
I've never been on a Segway.
about that Q&A forum Laurie held in Iowa with 2020 presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Our show ended Friday before we could talk about it. And hey, way to go, Mayor. Laurie put political pressure on Pete.
She grilled him.
She even made national headlines. The following comes from CNN.com. Chicago Mayor Laurie Lightfoot pressed presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg to break his non-disclosure agreement with the elite consulting firm that once employed him as the crowded 2020 Democratic race progresses toward the Iowa caucuses. Lightfoot asked the South Bend, Indiana mayor, quote, "Shouldn't you break that NDA with McKinsey and Company so that you have the moral authority and the high ground to get somebody like President Donald Trump, who hides behind the lack of transparency to justify everything he's doing?"
Wait, time out. If that's a quote of what Laurie said, that's the exact quote?
I believe so. Yeah.
Dang, Laurie, that's a good question.
All right, we have the audio here. Shout out to CNN. Ben, prepare to vomit in 3, 2, 1.
You said you can't talk about your work at McKinsey because of a non-disclosure agreement. You said today that you got to honor your commitment to McKinsey. I'm asking you, shouldn't you break that NDA so that you have the moral authority and the high ground against somebody like Trump, who hides behind the lack of transparency to justify everything that he's doing?
So Here's what I'm doing. First of all, I just pushed out a bunch of information about each of the engagements that I did when I was at McKinsey. This is my first job out of school. It's not like I was the CEO. I was making a lot of spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but people ought to know from somebody who proposes to be the president of the United States what's in your past. And just as I have considered it important to release all of the tax returns from when I first entered the private sector, something not all of my competitors have been willing to do. I also think it's important for my client work to be out there too. So I've pushed as much information as I can without breaking the promise that I made in writing. And I am asking my former employer to do the right thing, to not make me choose between claiming the moral high ground and going back on my word.
Yeah, but they're
they
not
could
going
fix
to,
this
right?
tonight.
And NDAs are courts across the land have said that they're not enforceable. You should break the NDA.
I'm going to give him a chance to do the right thing, and then we'll take it from there.
Dang, Laurie.
I think that was a good equivocation on Mayor Pete's part too.
You mean ducking and dodge? Listen,
Yeah.
man.
He didn't say no. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, no, all right, I know you're a huge Mayor Pete fan, but let's just put that aside.
I like Indiana, but
Now our listeners can't see it, but he brought in a Mayor Pete poster.
Yeah.
It's under the table. Don't show him.
Wait, can I just give a shout out to Laurie Lightfoot? I've been kind of hard on Laurie since the last couple months, but I could not agree more with Mayor Laurie Lightfoot. She was absolutely correct. Mayor Pete hiding behind that NDA or non-disclosure agreement that he signed when he was a kid out of college with that consultant firm, McKinsey, is the equivalent of Donald John Trump saying he can't release his taxes because he's being audited. In other words, Trump is worse, I guess, because he just made it up. There's no rule that says you can't release your taxes because you're audit. But yeah, I agree with Laurie Lightfoot 100%. There's no reason for him. That NDA was signed 10 years ago. What, are they going to sue him? They're going to take him to court? McKinsey's going to take Mayor Pete to court. We're taking you to court because you violated an NDA you signed when you were like 22. And yeah, you should release it because part of the reason the Democrats have so little credibility on the national level with my friends of the Bernie Sanders persuasion is because there's so many consultant groups like McKinsey who are always advising them to try to betray their values that made them Democrats in the first place by coming up with these little slick PR slogans that divert from real interests that affect people, like the need for health care for all. And so the fact that he worked for that organization back in, when was it, 2010 or 2011, whenever he was working for them, is a source of irritation and concern to many Democrats of the Bernie leftist persuasion. And so Laurie Lightfoot's absolutely correct. Tell people what you did for them and stop hiding behind this. What kind of firm asks its employees to sign NDAs anyway? Who do you think you are?
Did the Sun-Times ask you to do that before you got this gig?
That's a joke, right?
The joke?
Why would anybody ask me to sign an ND? No, nobody asked me to sign.
This is like those FBI, what do they call those things when they...
Nobody asked, just so people know, that was a joke. Nobody asked me to sign an NDA.
Correct.
Thank you.
What are those security letters that people get when there's a national security inquiry that the FBI makes, and they make it to you, and they say that you're required by federal law not to disclose that we gave you this letter. So you can't admit that you're dealing with the FBI on this. This is
I do not know what you're referring to, but I don't see.
This exists.
It exists. I believe it exists.
I'm just saying you could have signed something to the Sun-Times, but you were required to say that you didn't sign it.
I did not sign anything, anywhere, anytime, from anybody. My beloved Bright One didn't ask me to sign anything. The Reader didn't ask me to sign anything.
Or that's what you have to say.
Oh, my God, he's tricked me, Dr. Bike, or Mr. Bike. No, I didn't sign anything. Nobody asked me to say I'd signed something when I didn't sign it.
Sure.
And I don't understand why any firm like McKinsey would ask anybody who worked for them to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I further don't think it should be binding now 10 years later when Mayor Pete is running for president. And I don't blame anyone of the Bernie Sanders persuasion for being upset that Mayor Pete will not release the information. And kudos to Laurie Lightfoot for asking that question.
Non-disclosure agreement. That's what it is.
Yes.
Been wondering the whole time you guys were talking.
I'd like to hear some more audio of Laurie Lightfoot in the courtroom. You know, like what is she like when she's dealing with witnesses? I bet it would be interesting.
Was Laurie Lightfoot now?
She's a federal prosecutor.
Utter ignorance here. How many times was she in a federal courtroom in the last 10 years?
I don't know the number, but she was in there.
Mm-hmm. That was a good question. She came at him hard, and Mayor Pete's response along the lines of habita.
All right, enough about Friday's news because the mayor's looking ahead, really far ahead. In fact, a whole decade ahead.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, she knows it's a 4-year term, right? But anyway, with the Chicago teacher strike and that city budget in the rear view for now, it's time to discuss what's next for our Chicago mayor. On Monday, Lightfoot announced what the Laurie PR team and Illinois Politico are calling her, quote, next big thing. It's her 10-year plan to grow Chicago's economy. The mayor detailed her plans during a speech Monday, and her plan calls for growing 4 different sectors. And Ben, say what you will when we're done with this story. At least
1, 2, 3, 4. Got it.
He's a counter. And Ben, say what you will when we're done with this story. At least none of the 4 involve marijuana or casinos. We were starting to look a little desperate there for a minute, just begging casinos and pot to bail us out all of our problems. But here they are. We start with number 1.
Number 1.
TD&L, which stands for Transportation, Distribution, and Logistics.
Oh, I thought the L was love.
Aw. No.
That's number 5.
Number 2. Wait, yeah.
Number 2.
Technology.
Wait, wasn't the T? Oh, the T and it was transportation.
Keep up, Benny. Number 3.
Number 3.
Tourism.
Oh, there's another T.
I know. And yeah, it looks like number 4 is also on here as well, but it was mentioned in the first one.
Number 4.
Logistics. Logistics is in it twice. It's really
what
important.
Is logistics?
It's really important.
What is logistics?
It's when you're connecting things to other things. Like City Colleges has a logistics specialty at one of its schools where it hooks people up to careers in like warehousing, or.
But no, logistics as a growth industry. So that's a growth industry?
Yeah, because in large urban areas like Chicago, we have all these logistics centers that are in the periphery and the suburbs where the stuff comes in by plane and then they put it on, Amazon Prime vans and they bring it into the city. So all that interface between when it goes from one mode to another is called logistics.
Wait, time out. What are you literally bringing?
Products. What did the last thing you ordered on Amazon?
I've never ordered anything on Amazon.
Bad example then.
That's actually not true. I sit corrected. About 5 years ago, I ordered a book on Amazon, and then I vowed never to do it again. So I sit corrected.
Some people I live with get stuff every day.
So you're saying logistics is the delivery of goods through an online service like Amazon?
That's one aspect of it.
And so that's a growth industry. So you
Yeah.
get people to work in the warehouses and distribution centers.
Yeah.
I think there's more growth out of reefer, be honest with you.
Thank God he came here early. All right.
A lot of logistics here.
Lightfoot said success in building these industries hinges on one thing. Population growth.
Yes.
Yes, we need even more hipsters in Logan Square.
Liquid Yards is going to help us with that.
Oh, yeah. They're just going to move the hipsters from Logan Square to Lincoln Yards. They're not creating new hipsters.
Here's the quote from
I'd like that.
Here's the quote from Lightfoot, quote, "We will not be able to progressively develop the city revenues we need unless we attract, retain, and grow our population." She called on help from members of the Economic Club Monday to get this 10-year plan rolling, saying to the Economic Club, quote, "We need your partnership and investment." Less of the former and more of the latter, but seriously, help us out. Lightfoot also got quite an applause during her speech, but it wasn't so much for her 10-year plan. It was when she addressed all this damn dirty Chicago corruption and ethics reform.
Yeah, that's always an easy an applause gather. By the way, I just want to say, I don't know if I need an explanation from Dave about what logistics are. I think I'm not alone in that one. I just want to go back to when the teachers were on strike, and one of the things they were calling for were more nurses. I don't think anybody needs an explanation of what a nurse is and how important a nurse is and how we need more nurses. But remember, so much criticism from corporate Chicago. Oh, we can't afford nurses. But it's a good thing somehow or other when we have a person employed in logistics. But it's not a good thing when we have a person employed in nursing. Just throwing out there, interesting little contrast. I would like to think that like more nurses and social workers and counselors and teachers, firefighters, policemen, real like occupation. I guess I'm just like this old guy there, not modern and hip like Mr. Bike, who knows what a logistics employee is.
I don't think that qualifies me as hip.
This
might qualify me as corporate.
Now I just got finished praising Mayor Lightfoot, and I really did mean that. I thought it was a great question she asked Mayor Pete, and she really held his feet to the fire. But that speech about growing logistics is kind of Mayor Rahm country. Isn't that the kind of thing, Dave, that Mayor Rahm would be talking about?
So you're saying that in some ways the current mayor resembles the former mayor? Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm not saying Rahm too, like some people would say. But I mean, that's the kind of thing a mayor says. You know, it's like the downtown community. We need more logistic workers. That's what we need, more logistics.
Take a chill pill, man.
Oh, thanks, Ram.
So there you are.
Anyway.
Just like that, you're now in the know of what's going on in Chicago and or Illinois. Of course, we'll keep you posted on these stories as today's program rolls along. People, don't go anywhere. The Ben Joravsky Show is just getting started. And after this short little break, Mr. Bike is here. Hey, ring that, make that bell noise again. This is a bell, guys. This is a bike bell.
That sounds like the nerd meter from last week.
Much more where that came from. Don't go anywhere. The Ben Joravsky Show will be right back. We are live from the Chicago Sun-Times. The Ben Joravsky Show is supported by Northwestern University's part-time master's program in literature and liberal studies. Students learn from dynamic and diverse faculty as they build advanced skills for critical analysis, writing, and research. Evening classes are held on Northwestern's Evanston and Chicago campuses. The spring quarter application deadline is January 15th. Learn more at sps.northwestern.edu/masters. Read the Chicago Reader to get up to speed on what's what in Chicago. Culture, food, arts and entertainment, weekly concert listings, weekly event listings, the environment, travel. I can continue, but you get the point. And for all of you Chicago political junkies, raw weekly columns on real city politics from Maya Dukmasova and our very own Ben Joravsky. The Chicago Reader, free to the public in newsstands throughout the city and online at chicagoreader.com. Read it now and be a more informed Chicagoan.
Did you know that 40% of the people in Illinois opt to be cremated? Well, it's true. And Chicagoland Cremation Options honors their wishes by providing cremation services directly to the general public. Chicagoland Cremation Options provides an affordable, ethical, and easy cremation arrangement, whether in person or online. Save thousands and streamline the process by going directly to Chicagoland Cremation Options. It's a family-owned business operated by my good friend, Douglas Klein. Here's how you reach them. ChicagolandCremationOptions.com. One more time, ChicagolandCremationOptions.com.
Commercial break over. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show, live from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Dave Glowacz is in the studio. We call him Mr. Bike because he wears many hats. One of them is a biking helmet. He knows more about biking in the city of Chicago, biking anywhere, than anybody I know.
Lance Armstrong.
He knows more about biking in the city of Chicago than Lance Armstrong.
Lance knows more about doping than I do.
Yes. Dave Glowacz is no dope. So usually when you come on the show, you give me a piece of paper, a cheat sheet to read, and then I act like so knowledgeable. Dave Glowacz is blah, 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 but you didn't give me the cheat sheet, so why don't you tell people what the cheat sheet would say so they know who you are?
Independent journalist Dave Glowacz writes on local government at chigov.com. That's Inside Chicago Government, and other places. On Facebook, look for Inside Gov, and on Twitter, CHIGOVT.
And Dave Glowacz, in another lifetime, would come over to my house once a week or once every other week and interview me, talk to me about city politics. It was a blast doing that. For how many years did we? 10 years?
Well, we did the podcast for 10 years, or 11, I think. We did 11 years.
Whoa,
but at the end of which, we transferred to doing it over at the studios of that radio station that you were on.
Oh, I can't remember the name of it. You think I would remember?
It's WCPT 820. But listen, Dave, that's really interesting. Like, you were doing like podcasts before podcasts were like a thing, it seems like, right?
One of my credentials is that I'm the host of the original Ben Joravsky podcast.
No,
right.
yeah, I got to give him credit. It was 2007. I think it was 2007.
Yeah.
We have a mutual friend, Kevin Lamb, who is best known for being a cheesehead and loving the Green Bay Packers.
He has a problem with that.
He has a lot of issues, and he's trying to confront them. Okay, that cheesehead
Tried to
thing.
confront them with you, actually.
He just sent me a text. He's just
See?
so obnoxious. Kevin Lamb, Lamb, when it comes to his beloved Green Bay Packers. Anyway, so he was the one who said, Dave, you should meet Ben, and Ben, you should meet Dave. And I remember I was a TIF talk.
It's a panel discussion.
Panel discussion on TIFs. And
Sponsored by Independent Voters of Illinois, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you were correct. I think Mike Quigley may have been there as well. Am I right about that?
Perhaps.
Anyway, Mike Quigley at the time probably would have been a Cook County Board Commissioner. So Dave said, hey, let's do this thing, a podcast. I didn't know what the hell it was. And I said, sure, why not? 10 years later, he would be interrogating me, D. He would interrogate me. All right, now the shoe's on the other foot. Yeah, I'm going to really grill him. So now he's a regular on my show. And Dave, we're going to be talking about the city council, Laurie Lightfoot, passing the budget. Dave takes the deep dive. He's got a lot of good audio. But before we do that, I'm going to grill you. Okay, I'm going to flip the switch. All right, I'm going to pretend it's the old days, and you're me and I'm you. Whoa! And I'm going to ask you this question. This question was in my beloved Bright One today, home delivered as always, regarding an alderwoman from the 39th ward on the city of Chicago, Northwest Side. Samantha Nugent is her name. She's a rookie alderman, and she's upset because the mayor is taking away a TIF that's in her ward, the Irving Park Elston TIF. She's abolishing the TIF, and when the mayor abolishes a TIF district, with the city council needs to vote on it. When the mayor does that, then all the taxes that normally get diverted to the TIF bank account are there for all the taxing bodies. So it's property taxes that instead of supporting whatever programs are in the TIF, will support the schools and the parks and the libraries, et cetera, and so forth. Alderwoman Samantha Nugent is upset because she wants to use at least some of the $161,904 in the closing balance in this TIF for, quote, ornamental metal signposts to identify the old Irving Park neighborhood she represents. Quote, we're starting to get a lot of restaurants and shops, and we want to help promote that. In your humble opinion, Dave Glowacz, should that $161,904 be used for ornamental metal signposts in the old Irving Park neighborhood, or should it be used for schools, parks, police, firefighters, et cetera, and so forth? Dave Glowacz, answer that question.
The first thing I would do is look at the redevelopment plan for that TIF district and see if it's covered in the plan.
To see if what's covered in the plan.
What with the city council member Nugent would like to do.
In other words, you're saying something that I wasn't even raising, that the district was created for something other than ornamental signposts, and in fact, she may be using money that was intended for something other than an ornamental signpost on an ornamental
I'm just leaping right up to the balcony view and saying that every TIF district has a document associated with it at its creation called the redevelopment plan, which outlines what the district money is intended to do. And for all we know, that's right in there.
Yeah. So in other words, let's say, okay, by the way, a bit of evasion and a duck and a dodge of the question. It was a direct yes or no
I think
question.
I answered your question.
Yes, you did answer the question, but it was a duck and a dodge.
It's like that saying, God answers every prayer, but sometimes the answer is no. Let's move on.
Yeah. So then you're saying no, she shouldn't be able to spend the money.
No, I was making an entirely different point. But I'm just saying that this might be an intended use of that money, but without looking at that plan, I have no idea.
All right. So
I will answer your question, yes or no. If it's in the plan, then I'd say sure.
Then she should be able to spend it.
Yeah.
as opposed to kicking it back to the schools, the parks, the libraries, etc.
The question for you is what is it, $200 and some $1,000 that the mayor used to rehab her office suite when she came into office? Was that an intended use? What district is that? Is that LaSalle?
I think it's LaSalle district. I think it was $225,000. Don't quote me on that.
So I'm wondering, when they created the redevelopment plan for that TIF district, they have mayor's office rehab in there?
Well, the point I'm making is that it's not whether the greatest, if you will, sin, to follow up on your religious themes, of the program is not so much whether they're following exactly the stipulations, the plan to spend the money. It's that they're spending the money on frivolous things that they shouldn't be spending the money on, there are far more pressing needs that we have.
But what if this is what her constituency wants? Doesn't that have any priority?
So in other words, well, that's an interesting question. So we should put that to the voters of the. So you're saying that if the people of 39th Ward would rather have the money spent on ornamental signposts as opposed to firefighters, police, schools, libraries, that should be the overriding point, and they should be able to spend the money.
TIF is an economic stimulus tool, right?
That's what it's intended to be, yes.
So perhaps the case has been made, or could be made, that this marketing function of showing the business climate, or proclaiming the business climate literally from the street polls, is a way to stimulate some economic activity.
Dave Glowacz could not get through that sentence without laughing. I just want the word, but I'll give you credit, man. That is a great. It's a great skill to be able to argue any point and play devil's advocate.
I didn't even go to law school.
I didn't even go. I saw this story and I go. I know there's some people in the city of Chicago who, when they see these ornamental signs, start railing and ranting. What a waste of money! And I would have to say, in my humble opinion, that I would agree with the mayor on this one. I'd rather the $161,904 go to something other than ornamental metal signposts. To schools, libraries, police, firefighters, etc. It's not. Admittedly, it's not in the total scheme of things. What's the budget? I'm asking you about that. $8 billion. Is that what the budget is?
The number is 11.7. Very good.
Wow,
yeah.
11.7. I was only $3 billion off.
0.3 billion.
Yes. Wait, time out. It was
$11.7 billion.
Anyway, all right. I just wanted to see how you handle that. But your point's a good one. So now, if it's not in the development agreement, if the Irving Park Elston TIF does not have a line item for ornamental metal signposts, do you think the money should go back to the taxing bodies, or should she be allowed to override that?
I think that even before it came to this point, in other words, there was a city council committee meeting that then ended up in the newspaper, that the agency with jurisdiction, namely the Department of Planning and Development, should have had a conversation with Ms. Nugent and said, we're planning to close this TIF district. How are you doing with that? This is a direct result, I think, of the mayor's executive order to try to rein in the things that aldermen were I shouldn't say getting away with it, aldermen were allowed to do that were outside the municipal code. And so she asked, the mayor did in her executive order upon taking office, to identify those things. What are the things that you are letting aldermen do that are not statutorily required, but it's just a custom? So what I'm guessing is that people in the Department of Planning and Development, who had the largest number of those things that they reported that they were doing with aldermen, are just haven't figured out quite how the collaboration works yet. That's what this story is saying to me.
Well, this story is actually, we're going to get into the budget in a little while. This actually ties to the budget story. Essentially, what the mayor is doing is to raise the money to pay for ongoing obligations that she has in this current budget. She's closing TIFs, and so the money that's generally diverted, the property taxes that are diverted to the bank accounts, each individual TIF bank account, from which they'll draw to do things like pay for ornamental metal signposts in Old Irving Park, will instead be sent back to taxing bodies like the library, the schools, the city of Chicago, which controls fire and police, the Cook County board, and so
President's security detail.
yeah, so it could go for all things.
Their increased wages.
It could go for all the different items that are covered by the city's budget, the Cook County budget, et cetera, and so forth. And so that's what Laurie Lightfoot is doing. And I've seen this actually, Dave, from time to time. Aldermen get upset because they've come to view these little TIF funds as their own little mini, well, they wouldn't call them slush funds, but neighborhood development accounts. That's a nice euphemistic way.
They're very possessive of them.
Yeah, and in fact, in the same Sun-Times article that Fran Spielman wrote, Walter Burnett of the 27th Ward is lamenting. He's siding with Alderwoman Nugent, saying some of the TIFs that are in my ward are TIFs that I initiated to encourage the Department of Planning to put in. So aldermen should be notified and okay with taking them out, Burnett. So he's sympathetic to her. I'm a little less sympathetic to her because I think the money was taken from the schools, the parks, et cetera, in the first place without proper oversight. And so now they're just sort of kicking it back. But your point is very well taken. Mayor Laurie Lightfoot was just like every other, like acting like an alderman. When she needed her city offices redone, she just dipped into the TIF slush fund, found $225,000 to fix up her offices. And I remember there was a few years ago, Mayor Daley did the same thing. Wasn't it when he was building a ramp? We talked about this, I think.
A ramp?
A ramp for wheelchairs that went to the city council when they redid the lobby outside the city council chambers.
I know that ramp.
Yeah, they dipped into the good old TIF fund, and Brendan Riley was upset about that one from the 42nd.
Because that's technically in his district. It's
Yes.
his ward. Right?
Yeah, someone's going to dip into that TIF fund. He wants to do the dipping.
By the way,
correct.
I believe that Ms. Nugent calls herself alderman, as does Pat Dowell, as does Carrie Austin.
Is that true?
Yeah. I could tell, but you just go to her website.
Yeah, the Sun-Times just wrote ALD,
Of course,
period.
they can get away with that.
My beloved
Yeah.
bright one. So anyway, I'm just quoting the great alderwoman Sue
Who
Garza.
does call herself that.
She says, and she urges all other women in the city council. So I'm following Sue Garza's lead. All right, you have a bunch of interesting clips that you want to play. I'm going to turn it over to you and lead young Dennis through the playing of these clips, and then we'll analyze them.
Well, as you said a moment ago, the city council passed an $11.65 billion city budget on November 26th at their meeting. And
Yes, that's billion with a B.
And what was the vote on that?
well, there were about 8 ordinances. It's kind of an arcane thing, is that it's still really difficult, I think, for the average person to go to a city council meeting and figure out what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah.
Even though they have, I have right here the agenda, and it does have 8 items on it, all relating to the budget, but none of them actually say this is the city budget. There's the substitute ordinance amending the appropriation. There's a substituted series of amendments. There is the appropriation ordinance. There is various municipal code provision changes. So what it boils down to is there is a revenue budget that defines where we're getting money from: taxes, fees, fines, those things. And then there is a appropriation. I'm sorry, a management budget that lays out, here's everything that we're going to spend money on. So there's the revenue side and there's the spending side. So there were 2 essential roll call votes. There were a bunch of just sort of voice, at-large voice votes, but 2 roll call votes that were key. Mm-hmm. For the appropriation ordinance, where it talks about where's all the money coming from, what's where the revenues come from, it passed 39-11, And if you'd like here's a scorecard.
Oh, thank you.
And for those just listening on the download, ladies and gentlemen, David Glowacz has the documents.
He does. He does have the documents. This is really helpful.
So one of the things to note about that is that it didn't pass unanimously. And this is the vote that's often reported as the one that was the city budget vote, because they packaged about a half dozen ordinances into that one. And if you run down the list, you'll see names like La Spada, Lopez, Taylor, Rodriguez, Sigcho Lopez, Rodriguez Sanchez, Ramirez Rosa, Vasquez Martin, Haddon. These are some of the newbies who are so-called progressives. Some are who in a self-proclaimed socialist bloc. And if I'm not mistaken, there were a half dozen people who call themselves socialists that said, they issued a statement ahead of time that's saying, we are voting no on this budget together. They said that. There are a couple of people who are, I think we would agree, not conforming to the socialist moniker, namely Alderman Beal of the 9th Ward, and Alderman Lopez of the 15th Ward, who also voted no on that on that thing. The other big roll call vote was essentially one about raising property taxes next year. And you probably, I'm sure you've talked about this. This is a big issue, like whether the mayor was going to try to go to that well to try to raise revenue. And as it turns out, the city is raising property taxes next year to the tune of about $72 million, but only $25 million of that is actually going to result in increase in your bill, my bill, everybody else's property tax bill. The other amount comes from stuff like closing TIF districts, because now some of this property is being put back into the general revenue stream. So, yay for closing TIF districts. However, because it does raise property taxes, this other ordinance, notice that the vote was 35 to 15. So 4 more aldermen jumped on. Who jumped on? It was Alderman Hopkins of the 2nd Ward. It was Alderman Napolitano of the 41st, Riley of the 42nd, and Smith of the 43rd. So they get to go back to
Gardner as well.
Was Gardner in there?
Yeah.
Sorry, I see that now.
So this is an important point that Dave's making. Follow us. I follow him on this one, folks, because it get a little complicated. There was money appropriated by the city council to pay for all the goodies in the budget. That passed 39 to 11. Then there was a different vote on raising the property taxes by how much did you say? 20 million?
72 million.
$72 million. That passed 35 to 15. So this is a distinction without meaning, but apparently these aldermen and alderwomen wanted to make this distinction. They wanted to say they voted no to literally raising the property taxes, but they what they don't tell you is that they voted to appropriate the property taxes. So I guess I don't know what
they want to be able to say to their
go ahead.
constituents that I did not vote to raise property taxes, even though the budget is not complete without this additional set of revenue. So they came up with some creative ways, which we can talk about in a minute, about how to find to close what the mayor advertised was nearly a $900 billion shortfall in expenditures, anticipated 2020 expenditures versus 2020 income. Mayor Hopkins, wow. Alderman Hopkins. Everybody's getting promoted today. Yeah. First I'm mayor, now Brian's mayor.
Brian Hopkins. Yeah.
He wrote a letter to his constituents where he said, while many arguments were offered, I have the letter right here. While many arguments were offered during the course of debate in support of using a property tax increase to help close the gap, the one I just talked about, I am well aware of the burden that would put on all property owners in the 2nd Ward, which is his ward. That's why I have consistently pledged to oppose any increase in the property tax levy. So what was that name of that guy who got all these congressmen to make a no new taxes pledge?
Gordon Norquist?
Yeah, Norquist. Yeah. Yeah. So so it sounds like Hopkins is kind of he's
Well,
channeling his own Nordquist.
I would like to point something out about Brian Hopkins, is your second ward alderman, which is a very bizarrely drawn ward. I would want to say it's on the north side, but it kind of like stretches all over the place. So it's north side, northwest side, etc. He was
from Streeterville to Bucktown.
And very narrow. It's a gerrymandered ward. Anyway, he was the quarterback, if you will, that led the charge for the Lincoln Yards TIF vote, which, as Dave Glowacz knows, raised property taxes throughout the city. So it's interesting that now suddenly he is a champion on behalf of the beleaguered property taxpayers of Chicago. So he's voting no on raising property taxes $72 million, did you say, in this current budget to pay for things like police and firefighters, stuff that we need, but that he was leading the charge to raise property taxes by untold hundreds of millions. I don't even know how much, because it's so convoluted when you get into to a TIF, but to approve a handout. What was it, Lincoln Yards is $1.3 billion.
$1.3 billion.
$1.3 billion. So it's one of those things
where you can have your cake and eat it too.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, Mr. Bike.
So let's go on to some of the other. Some of these no votes are kind of interesting.
Okay.
There was, I would categorize the no votes as sort of in principle about. There are things we can do better in terms of social justice and so-called progressive revenues that this budget doesn't address. This is a contention by some of the progressive aldermen. And then there were a couple what I would call very detail-oriented objections that say these particular things in the budget don't work. And the first one I want to highlight is from Alderman Lopez of the 15th Ward, and let's listen to what he had to say.
What we've seen in this budget is that, for starters, it's a violation of the law. This budget is not balanced. This budget isn't just precariously balanced, it's completely unbalanced to the tune of $163 million. If you were to take at face value what this administration has presented, if $163 million doesn't happen, and if the rosy projections laid bare by the administration don't come true, there will be a supplemental ordinance saying property taxes have to go up, or 1,000 positions are finally truthfully going to be cut and not rebranded and refurbished in this budget. Deal with the truth now before we're coming back the end of December to address it then.
Some have raised concerns that this budget is built on revenue projections and assumptions. Every budget is built on revenue projections and assumptions, period. To have a balanced budget, we aren't required to have the revenue today. We simply need to have it in the door during the fiscal year 2020. And when it comes to the $168 million in ambulance reimbursements, municipalities across Illinois, not just the city of Chicago, already receive reimbursements for these services. The difference is that all these municipalities and the city of Chicago have worked together with the governor's administration to see our costs fairly reimbursed.
That was 42nd Ward Alderman Brendan Riley, who was sort of rebutting what Alderman Lopez says. So what they're talking about is in the mayor's budget is $163 million that isn't quite a sure thing yet. And what they're talking about is this. Let's say when you leave the studio today, you walk out the front door of the Sun-Times building, some guy runs up, grabs you, and body slams you to the curb, and you hit your head. Not that this is a common occurrence, but I'm just using it as an example.
What an example
to
use.
So then,
whoa, what are you saying? Anyway, let's follow your example.
So a Chicago Fire Department ambulance comes, takes you to the hospital. Presumably you're okay, you still live, and you're healthy. Then what'll happen is the city of Chicago will send you a bill for that ambulance ride, and it's usually in the hundreds of dollars. So they charge for that. Well, apparently what's been happening is that with indigent people, they never recover that money because they don't have it.
Yeah.
So what this part of the budget says it's going to do is they're going to start billing Medicaid for these rides that indigent people are taking, where apparently they had not been billing Medicaid before. And Medicaid is a state-run, federally subsidized, state-run health plan. So apparently the governor is on board with with providing this revenue, but I guess the federal government has to okay it before it happens. So what Lopez is saying is that the feds haven't approved it, so it's technically not in there yet. And he's going to go so far as saying, well, that's why this budget is out of balance, and therefore it violates the law. Mm-hmm. And Riley rebuts it and says, well, there's a lot of things in here that haven't materialized yet.
They're projections.
Yeah.
And so what's your position on this, the Riley versus Lopez discourse?
I was very curious that this sort of elucidation that I've just made has not been made by the Lightfoot administration. Everything I've seen reported about saying it's a pretty sure thing. It's sort of pre-approved, like a mortgage loan, but they haven't talked about how common it is elsewhere, why it hasn't been done in the past to try to sell it, which seems to me is a really, seems like a mistake.
They haven't done enough to sell what?
Sell this particular revenue package that would have cut the feet out from under Lopez of this argument.
I got to say this. I'm delighted to hear that argument come from Ray Lopez, who a frequent guest on this show. Ray Lo, if you're listening. He's come a long way. I remember when he was a rookie alderman, interviewing him as a rookie alderman. Agree. I think that, Raylo, when was that? 2015. I went down to your offices. I interviewed you. He was a babe in the woods, just been elected. And to hear him speak with such authority about the budget process, I got to tip my hat to him. He was paying attention. He's learned a lot. And I say this as an old guy to a young guy because he's a millennial. I believe that Raylo and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things politically. He's more conservative than I am, but I welcome his voice. And I'll tell you why I say this, Dave. What he's saying is absolutely true. Any budget is a projection, and generally they're making the best projection possible in order to, as Raylo points out.
That's what Riley is saying, actually.
Well, but okay, yes. All right. So any budget is a projection, and they're putting the best spin possible on the budget so that they can claim it's balanced. And my guess is that when all is said and done, Raylo will be proved correct, and Riley will not be proved correct, and they'll be coming back at some point in this year, just as Raylo is predicting, and asking for more money on the grounds that they're running low on money because they were too glowing in their projections back in November of 2019. So I think Raylo is correct. I think his voice is needed. I think that any voice in the Chicago City Council that points out sort of the fallacies and the tricks that mayors employ to convince us that they're balancing a budget when in fact they have no idea if the budget is balanced is welcome.
We're on the same page on this. I think both of us as lovers of democracy want to see the opposing voices made not silenced. And in the case of somebody like Ray Lopez, to do it thoughtfully and with a certain amount of knowledge that I agree he didn't seem to have before, but
he was a rookie alderman, and so he joined the city council. I think it was 2015. So, he would know these things if he was obsessively reading my columns and listening to our discussions because we've talked about this in the past, how budgets are projections, how there's such a thing as an election year projection, and then there's a post-election year projection. This budget was kind of curious. It really wasn't your typical post-election budget where the mayor has 3 years to just raise taxes and fund things. She kind of punted on this budget.
Yeah, so he's probably getting some of that stuff from your columns and from somebody who sits next to him that wasn't sitting next to him before.
Would that be Edward Burke?
That's right. He changed seats. Let's sit right next to Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, and so you're thinking that Ed Burke is explaining to this
I'm
stuff?
just stating the fact that Alderman Burke now sits next to Alderman Lopez.
Let me tell you this stuff. This is what's going on.
So let's move on to another argument that people had. Someone else who is another frequent critic of the Lightfoot administration in its short tenure is Alderman Anthony Beal of the 9th Ward, and let's hear what he had to say.
I rise to say no to this budget. We stated that when we go to Springfield, if we didn't get what we wanted, that we would have to look at property tax. Well, we went to Springfield and we didn't get what we wanted. We got zero from what my good friend Willie Wilson says, a casino that we didn't get. Springfield asked, why didn't we do an RFP on the casino? I asked that we do an RFP because you never know what kind of fish you might catch just by putting an RFP out there. You might have got somebody that said, just maybe, we can look at doing something with the formula that was in place. A wise man in my ward told me just last night that he recalled that Harold Washington had a budget that passed December 30th at 9 o'clock at night because this body was working to balance a budget. What's the hurry if we anticipate in getting this $163 million? Well, I tell you what, if we don't get that $163 million, you all are going to be raising property taxes on the backs of our people, and then how many accolades are we going to have in this body?
So Alderman Meal makes a few points. One, he's reiterating the thing about the $163 million ambulance reimbursement. But the other thing I want to highlight is he's talking about the fact that Chicago didn't implement the casino or didn't put out a request for proposals for a Chicago casino as was enacted by the General Assembly.
I just want to, one more time, I cannot say this enough. Hold your thought. I just want to say this. In all due respect to Alderman Beal and all due respect to Alderman Lopez, again, I welcome any dissenting voice in the Chicago City Council. I welcome more light shed on the budget process. I welcome people going back, getting historical, comparable parables like Harold Washington, what went down.
I'm guessing that made that a favorite comment of yours.
I welcome all that. I would just want to point out that both Raylo and Beal, like Hopkins, voted for Lincoln Yards. And when they created Lincoln Yards, folks, don't be ignorant, okay? If we're all about educating the public, what they did was they took very valuable property in a gentrifying neighborhood off the tax rolls so that it couldn't be taxed. And when they did that, they forced tax rates on everybody else to go up to pay the bills. So they voted to raise your property taxes when they created those two TIFs, Lincoln Yards and 78. They voted to raise your property taxes. Now they're coming back and saying how much they care about you and your property tax bill. So it's good to listen to what Beal and Lopez say and oh boy, Hopkins have to say as they're looking out for your property tax on this budget. But then you have to ask them, where were you? Where were you, the vigilant defenders of our property tax bills, when it came to voting yes for Mayor Rahm's TIF at 78 and Lincoln Yards? I just had to say that.
And actually, a city council member made your point during that meeting. It was Alderman Michelle Smith of the 43rd Ward.
Another reader of Ben Joravsky columns from a long time ago.
She said, I don't remember the exact quote, and I'm sorry I don't have the clip, but she said, anyone who voted yes on Lincoln Yards should vote yes on this budget. And she did vote yes on the budget herself, by the way.
Well, I'm not quite sure.
It's a similar point. It's not the same point.
I would not phrase it that way because I would have voted no to Lincoln Yards a million times. But I get her point. I get her point. It's like a distant cousin of the point I'm making right here. But I just, when I hear Anthony Beal and I hear Raylo, and as much as I appreciate them speaking out against this budget, I'm just reminded, Dave, about just the utter inconsistency and the hypocrisy.
That was the word I thought you were going to use, hypocrisy.
The utter hypocrisy of our aldermen who champion, and Napolitano's in that boat too for the 41st Ward. He voted for those two TIFs. Anybody else? I think Brendan Riley voted no on the
Lincoln Yards.
On Lincoln Yards, I want to say
I don't recall.
I can't recall. And James Gardner wasn't even there, so I can't blame him one way or the other because he's a rookie alderman out of the 45th Ward. But just the other hypocrisy, like a tax hike is not a tax hike when it's in a TIF district. But a tax hike is a tax hike when it comes to what? Voting for more money for firefighters and police. So I would like a little less hypocrisy and a more honesty on the part of our aldermen when they're standing up for the beleaguered property taxpayers. That's all.
Here. The other point that Alderman Beal makes is around this, as I said, the city casino. And one of the accusations he's making is that the city could have put out, all right, so here's what happened, is after the state passed the law allowing Chicago to finally get a casino that some people have wanted for a long time, the law included an economic feasibility study that had to be done within 90 days. So I don't know who went out and hired this Las Vegas-based firm, but some outfit called Union Gaming Analytics found that, you know what, the tax structure is just too onerous, that whoever does this, is just they can't make enough money. It ain't going to work. So at which point the Lightfoot administration kind of threw up their hands and said, well, you know, we can't put out RFP for this thing. Let's go back to the General Assembly. And this is what Beal is specifically talking about. She said, let's go back in November to the General Assembly during their veto session and see if we can't get them to lower the taxes in that law on the casinos so it can make more money. Well, right after that, of that announcement, is the chief sponsor of the essentially the Chicago casino law, Senator Terry Link of Waukegan, said that he was skeptical. He said, quote, whoever runs it is still going to make lots of money, unquote, without changing the law. So Beal is saying, look, you didn't have to, you could have gotten this money some other way. You don't need to worry. You don't have to rely so much on other revenues like property taxes if you had actually just put this thing out for bid. And then your colleague, Robert Herguth in the Sun-Times, reported Mayor Lightfoot's connection to gambling interests, namely that she's received about $250,000 from relatives of a gentleman named Neil Bloom, who's a casino operator. So these are just facts. So it's interesting that Beal raises this.
And let's just take a moment to just take a little deeper dive on what you said. We've discussed this many times in this show. Yes, indeed, the state legislature passed a casino bill that would allocate a certain amount of money for the city of Chicago, a certain amount for the state of Illinois, and a certain amount of money for the operator. And then, as you said so well, the operator, this consultant report said that's not enough money for the operator, at which point Lori Lightfoot went back to Springfield to ask them to change the formula. And we've talked about this in the show many times, Dave, with Jeff Johnson and other experts or budget gurus. You know, who's going to lose? If you're going to give more money to the operator of the casino, then either the state or the city is going to lose some money on the deal. And I am with Beal on this one. I'm like, no. Negatory. Anthony Beal, I'm with you on this one. Absolutely.
I should point out that even if a casino RFP had gone out, that would not have affected the 2020 budget because they would still have to award it. There wouldn't be any operation, presumably, until the end of the year.
Well, you could make projections. Again, budgets they could be sneaky, and they could go, well, we project that the budget will be operating by November of 2020.
And, you know, to play devil's advocate with myself, they could put in a temporary casino in a place like, I don't know, the Thompson Center.
Yes.
And, you know, and start the money rolling.
I love it when he plays devil advocate with himself. On one hand, it's like Woody Allen in Bananas where he cross-examines himself. You remember that?
Millennials. Hang tight, guys.
Anyway, I'm with you, Beal. Okay, I wish you could have. The bike.
That was the cash register.
That was the cash register. I'm with you, Beal. I wish you had voted no on on those two tips, but you're absolutely correct. They should have requests for. When aldermen, by the way, that's the other thing that kind of acronyms, RFPs. You were talking at the outset about how when you take a look at the piece of paper that says what's in the agenda, no normal human being would know what they were doing. So we're supposed to. This is supposed to be the let in the light era of transparency.
That's a great slogan.
Yeah, what let in the light? Yeah, thank you. I wish I had thought about it. So
this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
This little light of mine, let it shine with a piece of paper that says exactly what you're doing.
She never sang it, though.
Oh, yeah, she never. But I don't know. It's just like when guys get up and do the acronyms, RFP. Then you should say what an RFP is. Not everybody knows what an RFP is. Sorry, man. In journalism, you always have to identify it, right? Comma, Dave Glowacz, comma, budget analyst, bike rider, and bad mother beep, and that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? You always have to.
Gotcha.
Well, let's STFU, Joravsky.
Let's see about some other aldermen's objections. Let's talk about now some of the so-called progressive aldermen and what they had to say.
So-called progressive? Are you doubting that they're really progressives?
I'm just saying, it's not my term, it's their term. Let's first go to the 25th alderman who was elected this year, Alderman Sigcho Lopez.
Who will be a guest on this show, I think, Friday, I want to say.
Well, let's hear him in advance.
Mr. Bike, up top, man, you are killing it, setting me up with these. Good job.
Quite frankly, this is the easiest vote I've ever taken in 4 years.
Starting out with Alderman Garza.
I hear some of my colleagues talking about an easy budget. But let me tell you that outside these walls, for Chicagoans in this city, it is not easy. Just a few days ago, one of the developers that was a beneficiary of the previous administration did not do the minimum affordable housing, was also trying to evict a 72-year-old senior in the middle of the winter. So how are we going to address the issue of affordable housing when it's not our priority? Now, understand that we don't have unlimited resources. However, we got to define our priorities. As a city council member, I got my priorities very clear because I see my constituents every day coming for resources, from Chinatown to Pilsen to the West Loop, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of resources for mental health services, and it's painful to be silent.
Before Alderman Sigcho Lopez spoke, there was a quick clip there of Alderman Sue Garza, Sedlowski Garza of the Alderwoman Sue Sedlowski Garza
Get it
of
right,
the 10th
Dee.
Ward,
Come on.
who notably said this is the easiest budget I've ever voted for. And Sigcho Lopez said, no, this is not for me. Maybe it's for you, but it's not for me. And he talked about the fact that the budget does not include expenditures for affordable housing and mental health services that many of his constituents and many of other aldermen's constituents across the city have wanted. And notably, he is the alderman of the area called the 78 that is a beneficiary of another TIF district going in the South Loop. So he talked about some other I want to go to his tone. His tone is one of sort of, I can't stomach this. I can't. He said, I will not be silent on this issue. And even though someone like Sue Sedlowski Garza feels like this is a budget that works for her value wise, Sigcho Lopez is saying the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It does not work for me value wise.
Do you have a bit you're going to play here now?
I have more, yeah.
Okay, well, I just want to say that just to point something out, the first clips that you were playing had to deal with
details.
No, they had to deal with the raising of the money. And now we're getting into the spending of the money. And so there's two ways to oppose. There's two general subsets of opposition to the mayor's budget. One has to deal with the raising the money. So you heard Hopkins, Beal, and Lopez talking about how they think this is a burden on the property taxpayers. One more time, I'll point out that all three of them were nowhere to be found on the behalf of the property taxpayers when it came to the TIFs. But I welcome their concern about the property taxpayers in this budget. So they're concerned about the raising of the money. Now, Byron Sigcho Lopez, the alderman of the 25th Ward, is protesting and criticizing the expenditure of the money, how the money is spent. And in his particular case, it's not fair or just for the city of Chicago to raise property tax dollars on people and then use the money, not use the money to meet the most pressing needs that folks have. So that's essentially his criticism here.
Which invites a question posed by Alderman Matt Martin of the 47th Ward, that it is namely, if you want to spend more on affordable housing or mental health services, where is that money going to come from? And Martin talked a little bit about that.
Damn, you're good.
When I went to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, they talked about how easy it is to vote no on something.
This is Alderman James
but how
Kappelman.
much harder it is to negotiate, to get to a win-win, or at least get to a point where everyone loses a little bit. This budget does that.
Ooh, I love
With
that.
tremendous respect to my colleague, Alderman Kappelman, a no vote is not easy. Voting no is challenging for me and emotional as well, because communicating that vote does not, in my opinion, reflect the sort of time and effort that individuals have put into the budget. And with me personally, when you've listened to me and you've spoken candidly with me, it's not easy. And so share my frustrations with the budget. And there are frustrations that I think almost everyone I've spoken with to a T shares. Things around overtime that is rampant and unchecked with our police department and our fire department. And I want to emphasize that it's not a frustration with individuals within those particular departments. It's about this larger systems that they find themselves in, and systems that we as a broader city government are in the process of reckoning with, including the rising costs of lawsuits for officer misconduct, alleged and actual, an inadequate investment in affordable housing, especially in communities like mine, which have more resources than many, but not the sort of resources to maintain and expand affordability, which was a big reason why I'm here. Also, my frustration with our inability to bring in more progressive revenue. I think some of my no vote, to be honest, is a reflection of my own failure in terms of my inability, albeit in a short process, to put together information and to sell colleagues on some of the ideas that I mentioned earlier. So my hope is that certainly starting January 1st, if not earlier, that I'll be in a position to help effectuate these things, because with things like the corporate head tax, I know that there are real reservations with that, and with things like pilot, with other TIF surplusing approaches, and I want to make sure that I do a better job of pitching that so that next year I'm in a position, hopefully, to vote yes.
So notice the tone of Alderman Martin there. I think it's interesting that he says part of the blame lies with myself, not with the mayor, that I didn't sell these progressive revenue sources, a few of which he names. The corporate head tax, he talks about, there's another acronym for you, PILOT, which stands for payment in lieu of taxes, namely having large nonprofit institutions like University of Chicago hospitals and Northwestern Hospital, who currently don't pay property taxes, to agree to a voluntary payment, which is done in places like Boston.
This is really good stuff that you have, Dave. Excellent job bringing these clips in. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Kappelman, the bit about Kappelman, James Kappelman, the alderman from the 46th Ward, which is the uptown area just east of Matt Martin's ward, which is the 47th Ward. Even though they're in a sort of general area, the same sort of general region, the city are widely different. What Kappelman is saying, articulating, is classic Chicago verbiage from an alderman or from a mayor, and that is anybody who dares to disagree with the official line of the city of Chicago. And this worldview goes back to the days of Richard J. Daley. Kappelman wasn't even born when Daley was articulating this, and he's somehow or other it's morphed itself into him as a creature. It's like, how many trees have you planted? So if anybody dares to disagree with whatever the all-powerful chief of the city of Chicago said, they're a troublemaker. They're a ne'er-do-well. They never come up with any ideas. You can't get along with anybody. I remember people saying this about the legendary Leon Dupre. And let me tell you something, Kappelman. Nobody remembers the go-alongs, the cogs in the machine who do whatever the mayor tells them, no matter how dumb it is. But people remember those who had the guts to stand up to a mayor when the mayor was wrong. And I believe I'm thinking of the vote to sell the parking meters right now. Where was it? 39-5, something like that.
Right,
the 5 people who voted for it proud. They wear it as a badge of courage. The 39 who went along and used rhetoric much like Kappelman used at the time, Dave, because we talked about it on our old podcast. Oh, where's your solutions? How many trees have you planted? Can't you just go along for once? Remember Mel saying, nobody reads this stuff anyway.
So you're saying that Kappelman just gave a more sugar-coated version of that?
Yes, a more sugar-coated version. He tried
more
to
genteel.
He tried to Tony it up with his reference to going to some Harvard
School of Government.
No, and I thought that Matt Martin was correct, and I appreciate what Matt Martin did. And he was saying it was. Yes, you're right. It was Matt Martin was saying, I'll take the blame. He was essentially saying, all of you guys, ducked on this issue of implementing progressive ways to pay for government that the mayor was against. You ducked the challenge of taking on the mayor. So I'm going to take the responsibility for not doing a better job of articulating why these are good ideas. I'm going to tell you, Matt Martin, I give you credit for taking the high road by positioning it that way, but I'll tell you this right now. No matter how much sales job you do over the years, no matter how much you package it, no matter how convincing it is, if the mayor says no, the James Kappelmans of the world will not vote for it. That is the reality in the city of Chicago. Most of the aldermen, 26 of the aldermen, I would say, will pretty much follow the mayor off a cliff, which is what they've done in many cases, like the parking meter deal.
So you think Martin is tilting at windmills?
I think that Matt Martin is a gracious guy. He's a real gentleman. I'm proud to say that he's my alderman. He's been on the show several times, and he's putting the best spin possible on that you could put on this situation. I do not believe, and I hope, prove me wrong, City Council, but I do not believe in any, no matter how convincing Matt Martin is, no matter how passionate he is, no matter how much evidence he unveils to show how it's more fair to bring back the head tax or to have pilot, or one of our favorites, the LaSalle Street tax. You and I have talked about that for years. All these other progressive ways to raise money to fund the things that we need in the city of Chicago. I feel the forces that are against that, the corporate interests that are against that, have so much clout with Mayor Lightfoot that she would not entertain them, just like Mayor Rahm would not entertain them, just like Mayor Richard M. Daley would not entertain it. And it doesn't matter what an alderman says to try to convince them. If the mayor says no, 26 aldermen at least will, in this case, follow her.
So many people believe that in this last election of how many new aldermen were there? There were 12?
Maybe right.
13. Anyway, some low teens number, that there was enough new blood on the city council to essentially negate what you were saying, that they themselves form a block and could get enough other people to participate that would enable them to take an agenda that a mainstream mayor like Lightfoot would not necessarily cotton to, and be able to push it over. But you think that's a pipe dream in this?
Well, it was 11. I mean, listen, if you do the breakdown, and this is going into the weeds, but if you do the breakdown to make the point that you made earlier, there were, I think, 6 aldermen of the Democratic Socialist persuasion who would not be afraid, who would be like Matt Martin being one of them, who would not be afraid to stand up to the mayor on issues of taxes. And then there are aldermen like Lopez and Beal who are more conservative in their outlook, but they have found themselves in this position somehow or other of being outspoken, independent-minded critics of the way Laurie Lightfoot is running her budget and running her city. And so, and that's it. That's where we're at. We're at 11. We're at 11 in the city council, and it's a 50-person body, so you need 26 yes votes. So we're far away from that. I think we're better off, and we're in a healthier state, Dave, definitely, than we were, let's say, in 2009 or whenever it was that they voted 39-5 on the parking meter deal. I guess there would be 11 no votes to that parking meter deal. By the way, I think Beal voted for the parking meter deal, if I'm correct. Yeah. Yes, Beal.
Well, I know you know the 5 that because you had to name them recently.
Yes, I had to. Our next guest, I love when my guests show up early, So I'd like to think that we're in a better position because we had 11 that voted no for whatever reason. They, a principled opposition. I tend to think it's healthier if you have principled opposition in a city like Chicago, which my general problems in the city of Chicago is not what Kappelman's getting at, that people say no. My general issue in the city of Chicago is that all too many people just do whatever they're told and never dare to raise a question, never dare to challenge a mayor, never dare to question a budget report, go along with whatever TIF deal is put in front of them.
Which invites the question, and this will be my last point, is what retribution do aldermen fear when they say no in these situations? And some of the aldermen who were naysayers during the Manuel administration, like Sedlowski Garza, like Wagaspak, are now yay-sayers. But one of the last things that one of the last people to speak on the budget before the passage of it was Alderman Wagaspak, who is the finance chair and the 32nd Ward Alderman, and this is what he had to say.
Let's see what Scotty says.
Whether you vote against this budget or for it, you should have no fear in your choice. You should have no fear that a city worker is not going to do their job as they have in the past. Streets and sand workers will still get out there and do their job. Police and fire will still do their job.
Our workers in forestry, family services, and every department will continue to do their job, regardless of how you vote today.
All right, I must address this. I have to say this. As much as I love Scott Waguespack, he's been on the show many times. I did disagree with him, and I've used his ward as an example. In the entire history of the city of Chicago, in this century, and I'm looking at my next two guests, they can think about what I'm about to say and challenge me if they want. But in the entire history of the city of Chicago since 2000, no ward has been punished because its alderman voted against the mayor's budget. And I say that Mayor Rahm, I was no fan of him, and Mayor Daley, I was no fan of him. This is a myth that aldermen put up to justify their cowardice and their failure to stand up to a mayor. And I did the challenge in 2000, and this relates to you, Dave, because it had to do with bike riding. And this is one of my favorite little stories. I was sitting having dinner with a dear friend of mine who lives in Scotty Waguespack's ward, and he says he loves Scotty Waguespack, even if he does vote against the mayor's budget, but he's paying for it because the streets are so unpaved, okay? So this dude, who I love dearly, thought that the streets of the 32nd ward were unpaved because Scotty Waguespack dared to vote against Mayor Rahm's budget. At which point I said to him, obviously you're not a bike rider in the city of Chicago. You cannot ride down Damon Street in the city of Chicago and not go through potholes, over potholes, huge gaps. You don't know what ward you're in. You could be in the ward of Pat O'Connor, who was the mayor's floor leader. You could be in the ward of Scotty Waguespack, who was his greatest critic. You wouldn't Joe Moore, who was the greatest yes vote that Mayor Rahm had. And you wouldn't know. It's the inability of the city of Chicago to come up with the money to pave its streets is the problem. It's not the aldermen's being punished.
So one must wonder what motivates Waguespack to talk like this. I imagine a few possibilities. One is that he understands this perception, like the one that you talked about just now.
Yeah.
But another thing is he doesn't enunciate the idea that there will be retribution in some form. And I'll tell you exactly what happened right after this vote was taken. Reportedly, the mayor had a little pizza party for the aldermen, but the only ones who could come were the ones who voted yes on the budget. That's not such a big deal, but it sends a message.
It does
right?
send a message.
Right? Why not have the pizza party for everybody?
It's pretty petty. I call that petty.
But the next thing that happened is that the mayor has a political action committee, one for her own campaign and one to give money to other candidates that she likes. And the campaign for the latter reportedly started putting up the names of the people who voted no on the budget, and provided a link so anybody who said who wanted to give them grief about that, they could go and follow through on a link and send them, harass them on social media about it. So it's already begun.
I listen. That's a different point, and I'll concede that absolutely. It was the same way with Mayor Rahm. If you vote no to mayor's budget, that mayor will probably be against you and will run someone against you. Mayor Rahm was always trying to round up someone to run against Scotty Waguespack and was always ready to give money to somebody to run against Scotty Waguespack because he voted against his budget. That's different than saying that a forestry worker will not come out to your ward to trim your trees.
Which is exactly my point. So Waguespack either it didn't occur to him, the point I'm making didn't occur to him, or he doesn't believe it. My question is, I'm moving sometimes, I want to focus on government operations, but the politics is very interesting. I think many of us were led to believe there would be a politics of collaboration in the Lightfoot administration. I think there's some questions here.
Laurie, I saw the same. I follow those articles. Laurie Lightfoot does not play. Okay, so it's the people who voted against her budget, they're gonna know about it. She's got this PAC. If you look at the PAC, if you click on it, you'll see something like it'll say, like, if you click on let's say, oh boy, Byron Sixto Lopez's name, it'll say he voted against this progressive budget that was going to correct all the problems that humanity has ever faced. Shamed on him. If you click on Ed Burke's name, you'll say Ed Burke voted for this great triumphant budget. He's a hero to the people.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so it is interesting. Hey man, that's Chicago politics. I understand it. So if you're an alderman and you want to go through life unopposed by a powerful mayor, you vote for his or her budget. But But you should not go take it the next step and say the city of Chicago is so organized they're not going to pave your streets. You should not blame it on your residents. You say, I'm going to capitulate to this powerful mayor, vote for this stupid program that he or she wants, like selling off the parking meters, because I'm worried about my streets being paved. I do not believe any mayor I don't think they're capable of figuring it out.
Wagisbeck is my alderman, so I'll take it up with him at the next ward night.
Better be nice to Scotty, all right? He won't pave your streets. All right, his name is Dave Glowacz. He's done an outstanding job. Is there a round of applause thing?
Oh, Dave, that was that noise. Tell everybody where people can find you and what you want the people to know.
Find my reporting at Inside Chicago Government. That's chigov.com on your web. On Facebook, go to facebook.com/InsideGov. That's Inside G-O-V. And on Twitter, CHIGOVT.
That's correct.
All right, the great Laurie Glenn and Juanita Irizarry are on deck. Can't wait to bring them on. Two of my favorite guests. When I said that to Laurie Glenn, she goes, "You say that to everybody." No, I only say it to Laurie, all right? They're coming. Thank you I didn't say it to him. We'll be right back after this.
This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine.
Hey, everybody. What you're about to hear are the piano stylings of Jeff Manuel. Man, listen to Jeff go. Jeff Manuel has been playing piano around Chicago for years. He's played for conventions, for celebrities, played in basement bars with blues bands. He's played at prestigious social clubs, fine restaurants, and in the intimacy of private homes. Book Jeff Manuel at jeffemanuelpianist.com. Don't worry, I'll spell his name at the end of this commercial. You know what Chicago Magazine said? They said that Jeff Manuel is, quote, as comfortable with Chopin as he is with Cole Porter. He's excellent and his performance is joyous. He offers an elegant stream of compositions and interpretations that entertains the mind but won't hurt the ears. To hear more of Jeff Manuel's work and to book Jeff for your next event, go to jeffmanuelpianist.com. I'm going to spell it out for you, people. J-E-F-F. M as in Mary, A, N as in Nancy, UELPIANIST.com. Take it away, Jeff Manuel.
Hey, take care, Mr. Bike. See you, buddy. And off he goes, Mr. Bike, riding his bike into the city. Hour number 2 of your Ben Joravsky Show for Tuesday, December 10th. Good Lord. All right, Tuesday, December 10th is just moments away. But before we get into that, we'd like to thank the following unions for sponsoring this program. First, it's the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 126 and District 8. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9, the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, and, of course, today's Ben Joravsky Show is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor. Hour number 2, let's do this. It is Tuesday, December 10th, not February, and live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is the Ben Joravsky Show. In this hour of the program, it's the return of our dear friends and political strategists, Laurie Glenn and Juanita Irizarry. And now your host, not a political strategist, Chicago Reader columnist, Ben Joravsky.
No, I told Laurie today I could not do what she does. If someone hired me, they would fire me within a day. And then no one would know what she agrees. I cannot do what she does. So, yeah, definitely not a political strategist. But that doesn't stop me from opining. A political opiner.
Yes.
We got Juanita and Laurie. We're going to bring them on. You got an update for me, young man?
Absolutely, I do, people. We have a J.B. Pritzker update.
Oh, okay. So dramatic.
Which candidate does Governor J.B. Pritzker support in the 2020 presidential election? You're going to find out if you don't stop listening, so don't stop listening. But first, our previous guest, Mr. Bike. We'd like to say thanks to Mr. Bike.
He did a great job.
Yeah, Mr. Bike.
Tapes and everything.
Mr. Bike has liked the Ben Joravsky Show on Facebook. And we suggest that all of you listening do the same. If you're listening right now and you've yet to like the Ben Joravsky Show on Facebook or on Twitter at Benny J Show, what's your problem? Come on, do it. At Benny J Show, BENNY, the letter J Show. Give us a like, follow, share, review. Tell us you don't like us or tell us we're awesome. Either one. Do whatever you want to do. Just head over to at Benny J Show on Facebook and Twitter. Hey, maybe we'll read your comments later on in the day. All right, back to that J.B. Pritzker update.
Wow, I didn't know he endorsed anybody. This is breaking news.
Is it? Okay. The following comes from the Chicago Sun-Times, and one Tinas Fondeles. J.B. Pritzker gave a press conference, and Tinas Fondeles cornered him. Who are you supporting in the 2020 presidential election? J.B. Pritzker, well, smooth as butter. He said a Democratic one.
Oh, he's slick, that J.B. Pritzker.
Yes, J.B. Pritzker was born at night, but not last night.
I'm not a perfect person.
So still, we don't know yet, but a Democratic one. You know?
You got to give him credit, Juanita Irizarry. That is a pretty slick move. I hadn't thought of it. I was like, oh, my God, who do you endorse? By the way, did you guys hear Lori Lightfoot? I've been giving Lori Lightfoot a little grief today on the show for some of her budget stuff, but I give her a lot of love for her challenging old Mayor Pete. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
She went down to Iowa on Friday.
Yes.
And I don't know why she was about whatever. She was questioning him at some kind of panel, and
That's a mayor's caucusy thing.
Yeah, and she, that inner criminal lawyer, corporate lawyer, not criminal, but corporate lawyer, she was grilling him on the issue of his non-disclosure agreement for back in the days when he was a consultant with McKinsey. And come on, Laurie, let me ask you this question. Put you on the hot seat right now.
Uh-oh.
Should he or should he not reveal what he was up to when he was a consultant back in the day? Go.
I think actually he needs to talk to his former employer to see if there are things that he can share, because I think that he's now in the public eye, and we keep going back and forth. Like, I mean, to be in the public eye means it's a gift, it's a privilege, it's not a right. And once you go into the public eye, then you're going to be scrutinized. So you have to think about those things. Now, if legally, if there is an NDA where he non-disclosure agreement, then I mean that is a law, and actually the right, the rule of law is actually so being challenged right now. We do have to respect our laws, but I do think that we're trying to figure out with these candidates what are their values when they have power, when they're in authority. What are they going to do? And I also understand she grilled him, and I don't know how he responded to the issue of the African American community in his city as well, that he's been having some issues with. Do you know how he responded?
No, I did not hear that response. We played I'm going to go back and listen to the whole thing. We played the part where she's grilling him. God, I give Lori Lightfoot credit for coming hard at Mayor Pete. Do you want to play for Juanita and Laurie?
Yeah,
I want to get Juanita's comments on this.
You said you can't talk about your work at McKinsey because of a non-disclosure agreement. You said today that you got to honor your commitment to McKinsey. I'm asking you, shouldn't you break that NDA so that you have the moral authority and the high ground against somebody like Trump, who hides behind the lack of transparency to justify everything that he's doing?
So here's what I'm doing. First of all, I just pushed out a bunch of information about each of the engagements that I did when I was at McKinsey. This is my first job out of school. It's not like I was the CEO. I was making a lot of spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but people ought to know from somebody who proposes to be the president of the United States what's in your past. And just as I have considered it important to release all of the tax returns from when I first entered the private sector, something not all of my competitors have been willing to do, I also think it's important for my client work to be out there too. So I pushed as much information as I can without breaking the promise that I made in writing. And I am asking my former employer to do the right thing, to not make me choose between claiming the moral high ground and going back on my word.
Yeah, but they're
they
not
could
going
fix
to,
this
right?
tonight.
And NDAs are courts across the land have said that they're not enforceable. You should break the NDA.
I'm going to give him a chance to do the right thing, and then we'll take it from there.
I gotta say, Lori Lightfoot, good job. In my opinion, that's just my opinion. What's your opinion?
Well, I'm all for the mayor having pressed him on that. Absolutely. I was talking about this with a friend the other day, and our big thing was if he was not a white man at this stage in his career, he would not be a presidential candidate. I mean, maybe he should run for governor of Indiana or something, but I cannot figure out how you get to go from South Bend, Indiana mayor, by the way, figuring out slowly that segregation in the schools there was a problem,
Yes.
jumping to the presidency of the
Yeah.
United States of America. And
Yeah.
I know that if he was a black man or a woman, he would not be really in this space.
You know, I got to tell you something. Yeah, you're speaking my language there. I had this revelation when I was taking a walk the other day. Okay, I was taking a walk. I'm going to get both of your
Are
thoughts.
you getting religious?
Well, I'm kind of like a spiritual guy without the religion,
Right.
and it's hard for me just to.
I think they called that a hippie back in the day. Really.
A pot smoking hippie. So I had
Are
this.
you saying you smoke pot?
I smoked large quantities of pot back in the day, but that's a whole other story, which I'm going to deal with at another time. But I'm going to get back to this revelation I had the other day when I was walking down the street. I was walking down the street and I was thinking of Mayor Pete. I was like, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I have never, I've watched every debate, Laurie,
Yeah.
Juanita. I watch every single debate. And at different times, different candidates. Even the Amy Klobuchar, who's to the right of me, I like, I kind of like that, or I like this, and pretty much every single candidate on that stage at one point. But Mayor Pete is never really. I just don't feel it. There's just something about the guy. There's something. It's just like a phony or whatever. And then it hit me. You know who loves Mayor Pete? My beloved boomer generation.
That's correct.
They love him. It's like he's the nice guy that opens the door for them. When they go, oh, and how was your day, Mrs. Laurie Glenn? And they're like, oh, he's such a nice guy, a nice young man. What do you think about that revelation?
I have some friends that like him, and so I've kind of paid attention a little bit because of the people that I know who were speaking for him, but I haven't been able to figure it out myself. But maybe it is the age thing because they do fit in the age group that you're talking about. So I'll give you that.
I think it's an age thing.
Well, actually, I think we have to look at his record because, in fact, Mayor Pete is a more moderate candidate. He is pro-charter, actually. He is for privatization of education in America. And that is very disturbing to me. That is not a progressive stance. I really believe in public education. So while I think he is 37, I believe, and so he is a millennial voice, and actually I think he has this sort of statesmanship kind of quality. We do have to say that this man was in the military, was in the, on the front lines is my understanding. And he, I think, has this kind of cool, calm under the storm kind of. He reminds me of like the picture of George Washington or Napoleon where they put their hand in their shirt and they're marching forward, and he's kind of got that presidential thing going on. But the reality is, at this point in time, I don't really care about like how people act. I don't even really care about his NDA and what he did then. What I really care about is, as president, are you going to privatize public education? That's what I want to know. Are you actually progressive in your values? Do we share values regardless of whether I am okay boomer or you are a millennial? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm more progressive than you are, actually. And what I would also suggest is, with any candidate, is follow the money. So I actually thought you were going to say that our governor was going to state that he was endorsing Buttigieg, because we know our former mayor actually has supported him. And the largest amount of large donor dollars that he's getting is out of Chicago. So follow that money. Where does he get his money? And that will tell you a whole lot about this guy.
I will say I've got pictures in my head of the people that I know who follow him, and a couple of them are 50-something-year-old gay men, white men. I get that. One of them is an African-American woman I don't really get it, other than that she has known him for many years and, helped him on his way up. Another is a Mexican American young guy, right? They're diverse, right? But all of them have followed people and supported people that are different than I have supported over the years. So I guess we just have different politics. And it is, for me, I ask, is he progressive? And I would say no.
Yeah.
So the question is, who's been naughty and who's been nice? So obviously, in the presidential campaign, Kamala must have been naughty because she didn't make it. What happened? Her campaign completely fell apart.
That is a great topic for discussion, but do you say we need to take a break?
Yeah.
We're going to take a break, come back and talk about that when we return.
The Ben Joravsky Show is supported by Northwestern University's part-time master's program in literature and liberal studies. Students learn from dynamic and diverse faculty as they build advanced skills for critical analysis, writing, and research. Evening classes are held on Northwestern's Evanston and Chicago campuses. The spring quarter application deadline is January 15th. Learn more at sps.northwestern.edu/masters.
Commercial break over. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show, live from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Laurie, Glenn, Juanita, Irizarry in the studios, and we're talking politics, national politics. We're going to do some local, but we got into this national politic thing, so let's continue to the national political thing. We just got finished talking about Mayor Pete. I'm just going to throw this out there before we move on to Kamala Harris. Mayor Pete, and this is a generational thing. You guys are too young to know what the reference. Reminds me of a character in Leave It to Beaver named Eddie Haskell. And Eddie Haskell was always the guy.
She's old enough. I'm not.
He was like, go, Mrs. Cleaver, let me carry your bags for you. And then when Mrs. Cleaver was out of the room, they were like, hey, man, give me that bottle. I mean, that's who he reminds me of. He's Eddie Haskell. And even that answer, Lori Lightfoot, and again, can I give a shout out to Lori Lightfoot? I've been giving you a hard time about budgets, et cetera, and so forth. That was some good grilling of Mayor Pete. Even that answer was so weaselly. She asked him a very direct question, and he starts right off. He's so smooth. I got to give him credit. He starts right off. He goes, well, I wasn't exactly the CEO of the company. So it's like dismissing the relevancy of her question right off the bat. And then he's like, and I have been pushing them to do stuff. But even that, instead of just directly answering the question.
He didn't really design the ovens. He just screwed in he just had the screwdriver that gave to the guy that put them in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, all right, Kamala Harris. Right before we went to break, Laurie, you mentioned Kamala Harris, and the people teased me, my lefty friends, because I was drinking the Kamala Kool-Aid for a while. I wanted Kamala to make it to the next rounds. I liked how she went aggressively at Joe Biden in that first debate. I was really rooting for Kamala Harris. It didn't work out for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I have to say, I did miss that one debate where she stole people's hearts, and it sounded like she found her voice. And then in the subsequent debates, she just seemed like she was distracted to me. Whatever power there was from that initial moment, it did not seem to be there. Even in Facebook ads I would see her do, she just felt like she'd lost that mojo. So I don't know this woman at all, but it seemed like something happened and she lost that momentum. And in a campaign, in many ways, you can have $50 million. I ran a governor's race and we had millions, but the candidate's heart was not in it. And he won the next time because his wife's heart was really in it and really wanted him to be governor. But if a candidate isn't really into it, it is not going to work. And she had her sister So you've got this whole thing. Her sister's running her campaign. There's the whole nepotism thing is a dangerous thing. It's, you can't really let the candidate know. I read this article, she lived in the land of consultants, and I think Al Gore talked about this, and as a consultant, I would say to candidates, throw us away. Listen to your heart. We are just tools, but we are not the answer. We are no silver bullet, and I think she lost control of her campaign, and I think she and her sister are probably going to be in counseling for a while. Juanita?
Yeah, I mean, maybe what her heart is in is actually the vice presidency. I've always wondered if she was really going for the gold or setting herself up for something else. I was a little surprised in the timing of her dropping out. I in fact was taken aback, but she was losing staff on her campaign. I had never been one of the folks who knew who she was or saw whatever it was that had drawn people to her. I would love to have loved her if her policies had been different. But what I hear, again, is another person who's not a progressive.
That opening round where she challenged Joe Biden in that opening debate, she went at him hard on the issue of school integration, which that was hearkening back to an ancient issue, which is not really at the heart of anything right now. But she was so forceful, and then in the very I could see the seeds of her demise, politically speaking, this race. By the time the next debate came around, she was already backtracking on her support for Medicare for All, so it looked like she was wishy-washy. And then Tulsi Gabbard in the next debate went at her hard on her days as Attorney General in California and the fact that she was supporting locking up people for marijuana, et cetera, and so forth. And I've had a conversation on the show. Leticia Wallace was on the show, who candidate for lieutenant governor, and Samina Mustafa, and they made a very compelling point. As legitimate as Tulsi Gabbard was, Juanita, when she said that kind of accusation that somebody is a cop, Attorney General is a cop, is only reserved for women of color. And what Leticia pointed out was that it was the same thing that was thrown at Laurie Lightfoot when she ran for mayor. She's a cop. And what Leticia was saying was, I want to know that kid who got elected state's attorney or district attorney at San Francisco, Bowden, are they going to call him a cop when he tries to use that as a launching point to his next? In other words, that there's something unfair with the accusation that she's a cop. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's problematic in general. I still would probably look at Kamala Harris's record and be concerned about kind of how she came at things as a prosecutor. So, but honestly, when you talk about Tulsi Gabbard, all I can think about is this article that I read about how she's like part of this cult that is kind of wacko. So kind of dismiss anything that she says, even just because of her.
You mean
her
the white
background.
Suit didn't do it, or the white?
Wait, you're talking about her upbringing?
Yeah, there was an article about her upbringing, and one has to really read the full article to really understand it. So I want to be careful because it does talk about her being part of a Hindu religion, which is not the issue at all, but that she seems to be part of this secret group of folks that is manipulating one another and her, and that, maybe is following the leadership of some wacky guy. And we already have a wacky guy in the White House and a bunch of cultists as far as I'm concerned in that regard. So we need to actually get someone who is not wacky in the White House.
So I really think that when we're talking about criminal justice and you're talking about being the top cop, it is then your responsibility as the candidate to start talking about restorative justice and to frame the dialogue, because someone has got to actually keep the law exists, right? Mm-hmm. Again, the rule of law. But who does the law serve? So we know that the police state that we have currently was actually created to keep people in line, basically people of color, and keep them out and not in, and all sorts of things. So if you choose to be a law enforcement official, and I respect our law enforcement officials, but I really respect the ones who are thoughtful about what does it mean about changing the culture, changing the whole concept and notion of policing, of law enforcement in general. And we have to make restitution and we really need to change the whole way we think about things. So in my mind, if I was really going to love Kamala Harris, I would have loved to have heard her say, look, let's talk about restorative justice. We have retributive justice in our country. How do we change the way we think about the law? I didn't hear that from her.
Absolutely. And so listening to you talk about it, Laurie, leads me to wonder this. Is it possible for a candidate to get up on stage and say, I was wrong? Oh, yes. I mean, is it possible? Like when Tulsi Gabbard hit her hard with that question, it was a pivotal moment in that debate. And I've been thinking about this. What if Kamala Harris said, you know what? I was laboring under a whole bunch of assumptions that I now realize were wrong. What if Joe Biden said this about his vote for Bill Clinton's crime bill in the 1990s? Right. Does it make it, Juanita, does it make a candidate look weak or indecisive if they dared to say, I was wrong back then?
I'm just really big on truth. So I think admitting that you've changed over the years, or you've understood differently the ramifications of a certain policy, and now you get that there needs to be new ways to think about these things. I see that as wisdom. I see that as integrity, and we need a lot more of both of those in our system right now.
I have run political campaigns, and I absolutely fundamentally believe that candidates need to come up and either say, hey, you know what? I don't think I was wrong. Like, come up and say, I believe in this. We disagree, all right? Or say, you're right. I've learned. I've grown. I'm not the same person, as I was at 23. If there was something nefarious that happened under his NDA.
Which is true of almost all of us, right?
Oh, my
we're
God,
not the same person we were when we were 23.
That's exactly right. So I actually have often said to my clients, just say you're sorry. It's the first thing you do. Is you apologize. I was wrong. I'm a firm believer in that.
Well, I think that might have helped Kamala Harris. As I said, her campaign had a lot of issues because it wasn't clear what she actually stood for. So when you get into that issue saying I was wrong then, believe me now, then you raise the possibility of people saying, well, what are you, just a flag in the wind? You just blowing this way or that way? I think you have to come up with explanations for like what was guiding you back in 2005 when you were locking up people for smoking reefer, what was guiding you in 1995 in the case of Joe Biden when you voted for the crime bill. Apparently Joe Biden still stands by that vote.
Well, I think that's why people actually need to talk about policy. And some people don't like when somebody's too policy wonkish, but I actually appreciate it when someone can articulate the reasons behind the policies that they believe in, even if I don't exactly agree with everything. But to understand that they're thoughtful, they can really articulate why they got to where they got, that I actually respect.
I agree. I actually, again, when I ran campaigns, I actually ran campaigns for people who were not all Democrats. I actually elected a couple of Republicans. And why was that? Because the closer I got to the electoral process, nothing was what it seemed to be. And what I ultimately was looking for were people of integrity, because we live in a pluralistic society, and so it's a duking out of ideas. And what I want, though, are people with integrity at the table. I want to know that people are who they say they are. I want to know that people are going to stand up for what they believe in. Lori Lightfoot said a couple of months ago, actually, like her, don't like her, however people feel, she said, I may be the change agent here. I'm not here. Maybe I don't get a second term, but I'm here to do what I believe in. Now, whether you like what she believes in or not, I hope she stands by that.
Yeah, I'm all for the same thing. I think we need more reality, that everything is not binary. That's one of the challenges of my job day to day, is people want to break everything down to black or white in terms of policy issues, and most things are somewhere on the continuum in between. Right. And most people are not on one side or the other either. There are a lot of different nuances. And so the more we could have an informed electorate, the more we don't turn off our brains, the more we actually try to engage questions of policy, the healthier society we're going to be, I choose to believe.
All right. Well, let's. I'm going to follow up just what you said. In your day job, Friends of the Park, executive director, and so whatever. When Juanita comes on the show, she speaks for herself.
That's
okay.
right.
I always like to say this. Sign a waiver.
Yes.
And
This is
she
me
speaks
speaking, not the organization.
Not the organization. But you did say something to me. We were talking about what's your pet peeve, what's on your mind. So let's just raise that topic, which is a bit off from what we have been talking about. The whole issue. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, rising lake levels is the thing I can't get away from right now. There's folks all over the city worried that either their beach or their house is going to fall into the lake, and we've already seen some of the beaches actually doing that. And I was at a meeting on erosion down in South Shore just last week, where folks who live between the South Shore Cultural Center and Rainbow Beach actually own beachfront property, and many of those folks have the lake actually in their property already and are really freaking out. The other interesting thing I learned as part of some of these conversations is that the lagoon level is rising in Jackson Park, this being the lagoon that will be right across from where the Obama Center is to be built. So if we keep having these lake levels rising, we may actually have a lagoon in the Obama Center basement as well. That was an interesting
That'd
one.
be awesome. That's hilarious.
Is
Washington Park's looking a little sweeter these days.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that a selling point for the Obama Center to have a lagoon in the middle of the library?
You would think not, and they're going to build an underground parking garage right there. I mean, I don't know. You know, it actually came out in a Crain's Chicago Business editorial this week when somebody pointed out that there's yet to be a NEPA review, which is National Environmental Policy Act review, about the environmental ramifications of that site, and that issue is going to come up.
Well, at the risk of alienating all my friends who love Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and whatever they want, believe that whatever they want to do, they should be able to do, I have to point out, in my humble opinion, this is a classic case of Chicago, not a lot of oversight with the Obama presidential. I don't believe anybody's had a discussion about the impact of putting the facility in Jackson Park on, let's say, lakefront erosion or on the loss of parkland. I know there are people who are opposed to it, but they're in the outs. They're like the outsiders who are not in part of the not in the rooms, as Ricky Hendon likes to say. You know, there's the meetings before the meetings. There's the meetings where the stuff happens, and there's the meetings before the meetings. Anybody who's against the Obama Library is nowhere near the meeting where the decisions are going down. Yeah. So,
and a lot of people have been bullied into silence. But I will say, to say positive things, that Friends of the Parks has been invited to the table to a meeting about the landscaping next week, and they're doing meetings with a number of groups, and we will be one of the groups that gets to go to a meeting. And we have had some access, way more access to anything than we ever had under Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And since we want to say some nice things about Mayor Lightfoot, I will say that the review process has slowed down and changed significantly under Mayor Lightfoot, who it seems thinks there should be an actual legitimate review, regardless of what the final outcome is, that it shouldn't just be the city playing the role of the federal government and giving it all a thumbs up without doing real review. So we'll give her that credit.
So if you're discussing landscaping and we're having erosion, are they going to have lily pads as part of the landscaping?
This is a good question. I mean, there are actual parts of the design that are meant to be part of like stormwater management, but this whole issue of do you want to put a parking garage underground right across from all of this, you know, lake levels in a place that actually was a marsh, you know, it might not be the best idea.
So are gondolas part of the job creation program that we're talking about?
Nobody in the city of Chicago will tell the University of Chicago and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, guys, may not be a good idea to put this where it is while the lake is eroding. I mean, while the lake is rising and land is falling into the lake. I know you want it here, but it may not be a good. That's a problem, Laurie, Glenn, in my humble opinion, in the city of Chicago in general, not just particular to this. So people, you weren't here. We talked about this earlier in the show. We played a tape where one of the aldermen was getting up, extolling the virtues of Mayor Lightfoot's budget, and was saying it's easy to say no, which I found hilarious to thinking, because in the city of Chicago.
You should tell like all the aldermen who like voted 100%, except for like Helen Schiller for the budget or something like that.
In the 90s. Helen Schiller in the 90s.
Right.
But that's the problem in the city of Chicago. Everybody's always going along. Like people who will actually say no are treated. You're malcontent.
Are you referring to the Chicago Way?
I don't call it the Chicago Way. That was a line in a movie. The Chicago Way is saying it's the Chicago Way. But
so when I want my car parked, you know what I do? I go up and I say, I'll give you 20. And they go, okay. But now it's going up to 30. It's getting a little more.
Wait, time out.
You think I'm kidding.
Wait, time out. You give them 20 to do what? Just to park your car?
To park my car so it stays in front of the hotel or stays in front of the, absolutely.
That works?
It totally does. I can't tell you. I mean, my boyfriend thinks it's hilarious. Shout out to you, David Marienthal. He's like, I can't believe you're doing that. But it works. It's the Chicago Way. There is, how you doing? And how does people say back, how you doing? Like, we know we're Chicagoans. And there has been for years, as we know. And this is what I've talked to some of the Lightfoot administration. And I really do want to give a shout out. There are just some awesome people in that administration. And some of them, yes, they're young and they're learning. And but, I'd rather have young, learning, non-corrupt people than people who know how to get things done, but they're like so deeply corrupt. But, and one of the things I'm most concerned for the Lightfoot administration is not just the fact that they have a learning curve, we expect that, but that the people who are there and have been there for many years, whose cheese is getting moved, they don't want their cheese moved. And they're going to do everything they can to prevent change. So they're going to do things that will undermine this administration. And that, yes, that's the Chicago Way that I'm deeply worried about.
Just thinking about the Chicago Way, I just think about my husband, since you did a shout out to your partner. He came from Puerto Rico to be with me like 12 years ago, and he couldn't find Chicago on a map. He just said, I'm going where you're going, which was so beautiful. But he still thought of Chicago as the Al Capone days, right? So that's what, that's kind of the view that folks still have sometimes of how we do things here in Chicago. And it's gotten a little better, but we still got some work to do.
Well, the phrase Chicago Way comes from a movie about Al Capone, for what it's worth, that David Mamet wrote. He wrote the script to the movie about, so that's where it comes from. Everybody talks about the Chicago Way. It literally is from an Al Capone movie, and it's very apropos. By the way, so lakefront erosion, why is the lakefront rising?
So, people talk about climate change, and that is part of the issue, and then others debunk it by saying we've always had lake levels going up and going down, and that's true too. One of the most important things is that climate change has brought on more frequent storms and more severe storms. So even if the lake levels go back down, the amount of waves crashing up against your building if you live right on the lake, or the ferocity of those waves coming up on Lakeshore Drive and beating up on the concrete and the revetments, it is to be expected that that's going to keep getting worse. So there's a lot of money that Chicago's going to have to spend to fortify what's there. And actually, I will say Friends of the Parks is thinking about, hey, let's revisit this proposal we put out there like 10 years ago called Last 4 Miles, which was to complete the Lakeshore Path all the way down to Indiana and all the way up to Evanston. And it would add parkland in front of the buildings that are right on the lake in Rogers Park and down in South Shore. And so those folks who currently have kept the rights to the water didn't want to give that up, to be quite honest, but if they had public parkland in front of their house right now, it would be the park district's responsibility. And that actually came up at one of the meetings I was at. And it's sad because people's properties are in trouble and they're really worried, right? So that's terrible. But in the long term, having that public parkland in front of them would mean that the park district was responsible for that erosion. For those people who live right on the lake, they are responsible, unless they've given up their riparian rights and the Army Corps of Engineers has built a revetment. However, that takes a long time. So now they're in emergency mode.
And there is a precedent for this because most of the lakefront is landfill. And actually, some people, we were at Thanksgiving, they live on Castlewood, and actually there's a picture of the lake coming up to their house, and they're near the lake, but they're not near the lake. So we're talking about the lake is kind of creeping back and trying to take back what it already had. But that goes back to the whole issue of national policy on climate change and whether or not people believe that the most important issue facing our world today is climate change, and what are we doing about it? And while Mr. Trump, I hate to call him our president, so we'll just call him Mr. Trump today, is ensconced in the impeachment issues that are going on, the real issues are what he has done to the EPA and what he's doing by not participating in the Paris Peace Accords or the environmental accords. And I'm so worried about what's going on that is tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock right now for all of us.
Well, go ahead.
Well, in Chicago, in the Midwest, is actually supposed to be one of the better places to be. Don't move to Miami right now, But if we're already having these problems and we're going to be one of the better places to be, we really need to think seriously about what are the long-term implications of climate change.
And what can we do? Again, I'm shouting out to people today, Link Cohen, who works with Think Inc. and is an incredible writer. And he, in his also working on climate change, and Al Gore is training people to do these, evening discussions with people. So the question becomes, what can we each do to address the issue of climate change, and what do we need to demand from our elected officials to really actually pay attention to this?
And as sad as the situation is, this is actually a real way to get people talking about it, because just to talk about climate change in this kind of nebulous way doesn't always click for people. But when you've got lake water in your basement, or in your parking garage, then you start to think differently about it. And even I've just been thinking about this lately. There was a study by the Center for Neighborhood Technology that talked about stormwater problems hitting communities of color worse than other communities here in Chicago. And I just remembered that after living in the same apartment building for 14 years as a kid, what made us leave was flooding in our basement and sewage. And so it's hard to go to a community of color and say, let's talk about climate change, when they're like, I'm worried about my kid getting to school safely, and I'm worried about what I'm going to eat. And so people don't want to talk about climate change. But when you talk about sewage in your basement and you've experienced that, then it becomes a real thing for people, right? So this is a time, even though it's sad, it's a time to find real reasons for people to kind of start having that conversation. It's not just about whether you should or should not have a plastic straw. It's about, and that's a real issue for people with disabilities who need a straw. So I don't mean to make that not important, right? But people just kind of fluff off like these are not real things, right? But when it becomes real for you, then it allows us to really get people into the conversation.
Right, and the actual cost of living. We have a problem, we can tease about it, around potatoes. The potato crop is actually devastated. So you're going to say, we can't have enough French fries. But actually, we may not, for people who are don't have a lot of money, that is a food that
My
is
husband's
affordable.
really going to join the conversation because he loves French fries.
Right.
I love French fries, too.
So, I think that what I'm saying is that actually climate change is also impacting people's ability to pay for food.
But Laurie, I'm going to point something out to you that you already know, and I'd just love to get your thoughts on this one. The reality is the President of the United States does not believe in climate change. He thinks it's a hoax perpetuated by the Chinese to undermine our economy. That's what he says. He is supported by 90% of Republicans. He has locked up at least 75% of electoral votes he needs to get reelected. Right. So we're heading, the both of you very convincingly point out that this existential threat we're facing that demands immediate attention in the forms some kind of regulatory policies, and yet the ruling party of our country, the party that controls the White House, the party that controls the Senate, the party that controls the Supreme Court, the party that controls public opinion in this very city with some of our mainstream newspapers, says that you are preaching a hoax, that we shouldn't listen to you when you say that this is a very important existential threat, that it's non-existent and made up, and that we should just go back to enjoying the tax breaks that the president gave us. How do you deal with that as a political strategist? How do you just deal with that with trying to figure out a way out of these problems?
Well, it's always a battleground of ideas. I mean, again, going back to a pluralistic society, we are going to be duking it out and the playing field of ideas. Now, the reality is, if we're going to link this to the presidential campaign and the Electoral College, what we really have to figure out is what is the strategy for people in Michigan, for instance. Oh, that would be Flint, Michigan, who can't drink the water. Wow. So that's like sort of a basic. I can't drink my water. And actually, WBEZ did a big story about lead in our water yesterday that people should listen to. So all of a sudden, people in Chicago can't drink the water. And I bet if we tested it around the country, our infrastructure is, as we know, failing us. So for me, I don't believe that I shouldn't talk about climate change because our president doesn't believe in it. That's bullshit. What I'm going to do, actually, is I'm going to, as Juanita spoke about earlier, I am going to relate to everyday people's lives, the everyday issues, and how climate change is impacting them, the cost of living, and actually their children's cognitive ability. If you have lead poisoning, you are screwed for life. There are untold impacts from this. But really, you know, we have to count. So the Democratic Party leadership, all I can tell you is, you know, who's been naughty and nice, who's winning, who's losing. I think we are in a better place than we were a year ago. First of all, Rahm Emanuel is no longer mayor, and thank God. And I am really glad Lori Lightfoot is mayor right now. And you keep asking me, you know, I gave her 18 months. And so I'm going to keep giving her, she's got a few more months left to become the kind of mayor. I mean, I already like her as a mayor, but I am looking forward to her continued growth as a leader. And certainly, I believe that when I wake up in the morning and I don't have to hear Rahm's name every day, I feel like, you know, a lot less stressed out. And of course,
Take a chill pill, man.
Yeah, I get to hear my own name, though we spell it differently. So yeah. I like that a lot. But I want to say that the Democrats also, you know, I do want to give one shout out to these presidential candidates. You may not like them, you know, like they may not be your cup of tea, but in the last debates that I've watched, because Ben has shied me into it, they're really smart people. You know, you may not like them. They may not be your particular cup of tea, but no one is really actively stupid. Now, Gabby's a little strange, okay? She's
I actually disagree
weird.
with you guys at Gabby. I'm
just saying,
Tulsi
like
Gabbard. I don't know what article you read, so I can't comment on the article. I did not read the article.
Send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. I'll be happy to read the article. And we've had Samina Mustafa, Romana Hussein on the show have done a very good job of pointing out that Tulsi Gabbard is a little too sympathetic, let's put it that way, to the Prime Minister, the President of India, Hindu nationalism, et cetera, and so forth. Very destructive force in India, and that is, you know, that is something that you should be very concerned about. But I do appreciate her voice. I've said this to Samina when she's on the show, that the fact that she's willing to stand up and just speak critically about American foreign policy and how so many Americans have been sent off to fight wars, and we don't know why they're even fighting the wars, and we don't know what the justification is. So I think she fits in with what you were saying, Laurie, that she has and her exchange with Pete Buttigieg. I'm not thinking about this. And the last debate where she came at him strong, and on the issue of whether
sending people to war, and then he classic Pete. He started doing the dancing and the dodging, and so I don't know. I welcome her in the race.
So I want to go back to Trump for a minute, and I think about the fact that he just declared his residency in Florida. And, you know, while New York is also right on the ocean, there's a lot more talk about climate change and its impact in Florida. So I'm just going to kind of cross my fingers, because some of the Republicans down there are actually starting to talk about climate change as a real thing they have to practically address. They've moved from it just being this pretend thing to recognizing that they're actually already experiencing the problems, right? So I think that's where we have to focus, is on where people really are experiencing the impacts.
I'm with you 100%, and this is what I don't understand. Florida's considered a toss-up state. and Trump took it in 2016. And I'm with you. Just following up on what Laurie said, Juanita, I'm with you 100%. There was the algae problems on the shoreline of Florida that was killing off the tourist industry. You have erosion in southern Florida, where Miami is facing the same experiences that people on the south side of Chicago are facing. Yep. You would think that the voters of Florida the polls would be heavily in favor of the Democrats, just because their existence is being threatened. Their tourist industry, right, is being threatened by the algae, etc. And yet it's still considered a toss-up state, or Trump's ahead of it. I sometimes...
Yeah. Well, I think there's still time, and I'm also going to depend on my Puerto Rican people who are moving there in droves, both from Puerto Rico and from the Rust Belt states, to go out to vote and to turn Florida blue, and I just might have to go do some work down there while we're at it.
That might be a good idea, because I really have a hard time with people in Florida, why they're still sticking to the Republicans. Republicans doing nothing for them existentially. Before we go, I have to ask, Laurie Glenn is our expert, our in-house expert on California politics. Back in the day, she was a political consultant, a political strategist in California. She's best friends with Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, stop.
She's got her on the speed dial right now.
Oh, yeah, right. Hey, I really liked, though, her whole conversation about hate.
Yes,
I
let's
loved
talk about
that. I was like, thank you, Nancy. She's like, don't you talk to me about hate. I'm Catholic. I don't hate anyone. I may hate you right now, but I don't hate anyone. But I loved that, because it's like, enough is enough. You know, she's got balls. Man, I got to tell you, I have not always seen eye to eye with Nancy.
I was teasing when I said you were our best friend.
I know, but I have to say, what a stand-up gal. Talk about someone who's and this, I don't want to sound pejorative. I don't know how to not sound it, but someone who's grown into her leadership role. This is brava to you, Nancy Pelosi. I am so proud of you, and that you are the head of our party, and that you are really the most powerful woman speaker that we have, and literally a speaker and the speaker of voice. And here she is balancing all these different pieces of the party, because it is a transitional moment. We are going through a generational shift, and that is what is also creating this tension within the party. And we do need to let the young people take over the party. They just get to make their own mistakes, and I think the baby boomers are holding on a bit too tight. But I want to say, again, brava. She's doing a great job, and I believe that Donald Trump is scared of her, and he should be, because she is just a whole lot smarter than he is.
Before I get Juanita's thoughts, I just want to point out a correction. We made this last time. Nancy Pelosi is not a baby boomer. I had this little discussion.
That's correct.
She is, what is it? The silent generation, isn't that what it was called? She's actually above
Older
baby,
than that.
older
Right.
than the baby boomers. Anyway, Juanita.
Yeah, I just say I've never been a super Nancy Pelosi fan either, but I have been impressed with her leadership in these recent days. So I echo what Laurie has said. And I just want to leave you with the fact that my birthday is December 23rd, and I will take it as a birthday present, and it will not mess up my Christmas if Donald Trump is impeached between now and then.
With you 100% on that one. And speaking of which, tomorrow we will do lots of Trump talk about the impeachment. Monroe Anderson and Adolfo Mondragon will be in the studio talking Trump. So plenty of Trump impeachment talk. We didn't really do that today. We're talking a lot of local issues. So Laurie Glenn, Juanita Irizarry, thank you so much. You will not be back in the studio before Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's. So Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year's. Nick Sposato told me I'm not allowed to say Happy Holidays. Nick Sposato was in here. You know, I open up my studio to even Trump supporters. Nick Sposato, an alderman from the 30.
As you should.
As I should. Well, not on limits. It's on limits, but, you know, I've known Nick for a few years.
You're a journalist here. You're supposed to be valid.
So we had Nick in the studio, and he was chiding me, among other things, with no Happy Holidays. He said, I'm not allowed to say Happy Holidays, Juanita.
I'm a good evangelical girl, and I'm happy to say Happy Holidays.
Yeah, like I said to Nick, what if you don't believe it? If you're an atheist, you know, what if you don't believe in God? You know, that just blew his mind.
Well, I just want to give a shout out talking about safe and peaceful communities that Laura Washington did an amazing column on Monday about the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities has been investing in groups on the ground, communities partnering for peace, CRED and READY. They don't invest in CRED, but they partner all together. And I am just so proud of working with these groups on the ground because they are making a difference. And while $11 million that Laurie Lightfoot gave to the Office of Violence Prevention under the leadership of Susan Lee and Norman Kerr, and shout out to the two of them, that is more than the $350,000 that Rom had given, and it is definitely a step in the right direction. I want to thank the mayor for doing that, encourage her to give more, and I want to shout out to all these people who put their lives at risk to make our cities a safer city, and I just want to say thank you.
All right, very good. That's Laurie Glenn, Juanita Irizarry. Thank you both for coming in. I want to thank Dave Glowacz, Mr. Bike, outstanding job he did with those clips from the city council, breaking down the budget process. And, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, as Juanita knows, back home in Alton, Illinois, they call him White Lightning.
No one calls me that, but I'm going to give a special shout-out to, we're back on YouTube, by the way, everybody. So if you're listening to this on the download, head over to YouTube for our Wednesday show. Shout out to all of our YouTube live stream chatters. They are disagreeing, but getting along.
Okay. Disagreeing. Which part are they disagreeing? The criticism of Laurie Lightfoot or the praise of Laurie Lightfoot?
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in and jumping back with us.
Yes, appreciate was it Brian we have to thank for that? Mr. Ernst for getting us back on YouTube. All right, as I was saying, the man, the myth, the legend, the pride and joy of Alton, Illinois. Give yourself a raise. Take it out of petty cash. See you tomorrow, everybody.
Hey, and remember, you can download previous Ben Joravsky shows and Benny J bonus interviews at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites, and wherever else you download your favorite podcasts. Downloaders, like I said, we live stream this program on the Ben Joravsky show, on the Chicago Sun-Times YouTube channel. I'll get it right. Yeah, we were on Facebook, but no longer. Sorry, Zuckerberg. Back on YouTube. Go check us out. Search for the Chicago Sun-Times, 1 until 3 p.m. Central Time. And find us on social media at Benny J Show, BENNY, the letter J Show on Facebook and Twitter, and the Ben Joravsky Show on Instagram, JORAV as in Victory, SKY. See you tomorrow.